Chambers, the Deputy Speaker.
Afternoon. Thank you, colleagues. And just before we move to government matters of constituency statements, I'm going to call on the member for Bruce to make a statement in relation to an incident in Federation Chamber yesterday. Member for Bruce.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. All feedback is a gift, and I've had some feedback, and I'd therefore like to withdraw the use of the term grub and just indicate that that was something I was not aware is now considered unparliamentary, given it's been used for centuries and considered parliamentary. But in our new higher standards environment in future, I will refrain from personalising the use of that commonly used term and restrict myself to observing grubby behaviour as opposed to passing judgment on the character of someone. So thank you for that opportunity to withdraw that term.
I think the Federation Chamber appreciates the withdrawal, and I would like to move now to constituency statements by honourable members, and I give the call to the member for Kooyong.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over the past fortnight, I've been contacted by several Kooyong residents who've been alarmed and distressed to hear that REDcycle has paused its operations and about the allegations that it's not been appropriately recycling soft plastics. Jackie wrote, "The announcement that REDcycle is pausing operations this week is a sad day for the environment." She worries appropriately that the news will affect consumer confidence in recycling efforts. Meg tells me it's a bit like the straw that broke the camel's back, and I hope the government can begin to make strong climate policies. This is precisely what two innovative and enterprising members of my Kooyong community have done. It gives me immense pride to bring to Parliament a story of two inspiring women from Kooyong, Catherine Creston and Jenny Irving, who have identified a clear gap and a need between what governments at all levels provide in terms of education, facilities and services for people to be able to live sustainably. And they've decided to fill that gap themselves by creating the Burundara Hard Rubbish Rehome. The core business of Burundara Hard Rubbish Rehome is to support a local circular economy. Founded by 5 members in early September 2022, its membership is already close to 2,000 and growing by over 100 a week. These 2,000 rehomies are working together to rescue good items from hard rubbish piles so they don't get sent to landfill but are instead rehomed. The items rescued are rehomed with individuals, but also given to a range of community groups. Programs supported by a number of Rotary organisations and animal welfare groups, but also to families fleeing domestic violence and the Pacific Island Labour Mobility Scheme. The BHRR is committed to documenting what's diverted to landfill. Jenny and Kath are weighing and cataloguing everything they rescue from the hard rubbish. To date, they've diverted more than 3.7 tonnes of goods from landfill, rehoming those across our community. They're also re-educating and reframing the discussion around hard waste into one about redistributing resources, whether this involves reuse, repurposing, recycling or repairing through the correct channels. This is a key part of our circular economy. I really had the honour of being supported in my run for office by Kath and Jen. They volunteered on my campaign. They ensured that all waste created by the campaign was carefully sorted and sent to the appropriate recycling, composting and rehoming schemes. My heartfelt congratulations to Kath, Jen and all of our rehomies for bringing this to life, this very powerful grassroots initiative. They're building a positive, respectful community within a community. I commend this volunteer-driven grassroots initiative bridging the gap into recycling services to the House.
Thank you. Assistant Minister and Member for Dobell.
Deputy Speaker, you might have noticed that I'm a little bit sunburnt today. That's because I spent most of the weekend out in the sun, sand and surf in my community on the Central Coast of New South Wales. The Central Coast is home to more than 40 beaches, stretching along almost 90 kilometres of stunning coastline, including Soldiers Beach at Norah Head. I'm proud to say that after long-standing efforts from our community, Norah Head has now been declared a National Surfing Reserve. The Norah Head National Surfing Reserve stretches between Hargraves Beach and Pelican Point. This unique coastline is home to 9 beach breaks, 3 bomboras and 2 reef breaks. It has nurtured state and national champions on both short and long boards, and it's now the first national surfing reserve on the central coast of New South Wales. On Saturday, I was delighted to join the people who made this happen when I visited Soldiers Beach Headland for the official dedication ceremony and the unveiling of the new plaque designed by Steve Curran. I would like to acknowledge the Norah Head Surfing Fraternity, Soldiers Beach Surf Life Saving Club, the Norah Head Lighthouse Reserve, Darkinjung Local Aboriginal Land Council, Arnie Bronwyn Chambers and her grandson Jack, Norah Head Women in Waves, Norah Head Sporties, Marine Rescue Norah Head, Central Coast Council and the Norah Head National Surfing Reserve Committee for their hard work and dedication to this effort on behalf of our entire community. Deputy Speaker, I would also like to give special thanks to Debbie McGuigan and Jules Seckham. They describe themselves as just 2 old ladies, but without their passion and vision, this project wouldn't be a reality today. And the past few years have been tough for our community, and the COVID-19 pandemic presented further challenges in our efforts to secure National Surfing Reserve status. In a coastal community like ours, the beach is like a second home. I can remember going to Soldiers Beach for morning surfs with my dad, Grant, and my brothers before school. There's nothing like jumping on your board, diving headfirst into the surf and having the cool waves crash around you. As Debbie McGuigan's late husband, Barry, put it, it's ever-changing, pleasant, addictive and exciting. It's pleasant when there's a small wave and you can try your moves. It's exciting when it's big and you've got to survive. Deputy Speaker, Norah Head's National Surfing Reserve status means so much to so many people in our community, a community of surfers, swimmers, beachgoers and people who care deeply about our natural environment. Our coastline and our beaches are sacred and we must protect them for the future. I hope, and I know it's our community's hope, and I mentioned David Harris, the member for Wyong, who has been a strong supporter of this project as well and who joined me on the weekend. Our hope is that the declaration of a National Surfing Reserve at Norah Head will inspire locals and visitors alike to share, respect and preserve our pristine coastline now and into the future.
Time's expired. And the member for Deakin.
Well, thanks very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The former coalition government invested significantly into the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, and indeed those investments continue to this day, even after 6 months in opposition, where we see major community works continuing at the Dorset Recreation Reserve, which will be one of the best soccer facilities, I would argue, in Australia, let alone in the eastern suburbs. And I know the Croydon City Arrows and our local Burmese community are very excited about the Dorset Recreation Reserve. We've just completed the Ainslie Park Pavilion as well, which was funded by the former coalition government, supporting the East Ringwood Junior Football Club, Ainslie Park Cricket Club, and they're enjoying their new rooms, which we built in partnership with Maroondah City Council. We've also just completed Cheong Park for the South Croydon Cricket Club and South Croydon Football Club, another much-needed upgrade. And finally, this week we saw the lights being turned on at Riley Street and Wanturna Road, which the signalisation ensuring a much better safety, not just for vehicles but also for pedestrians. They are just the tail end of a huge number of projects delivered for the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. But what we've seen since the election, and particularly since the budget, is the government ripping out and cancelling projects in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. It's quite shameful, Madam Deputy Speaker, to see Labor again punishing the eastern suburbs. Of course, this federal government cut the $4 billion which was available and on the table for the East-West Link, which would finally see an improvement on traffic on the Eastern Freeway. Had the project not been cancelled by Labor, we'd already have the East-West Link. It would have been built. We wouldn't have wasted $1.3 billion to cancel the contract. Instead, the Eastern Freeway in peak hour resembles more of a car park. To make it worse, the government cut train station car parks at Heatherdale and Heathmont, some $34 million, 700 car parking spaces to be constructed. And we know from the car park that we built at the Croydon station in my electorate that these are very popular and alleviate and ensure that people are able to more easily access public transport. There's nothing more frustrating than arriving at the station in the morning, not being able to get a car park. And shamefully, Madam Deputy Speaker, we saw the government cut $50 million from the upgrade to Dorset Road. Dorset Road is an increasingly busy arterial in my electorate. The $50 million upgrade, so crucially needed for residents, not just in Croydon but throughout the eastern suburbs, again cancelled by Labor. So we've seen since the election the eastern suburbs being punished with these projects being cancelled. We fought so hard for them, and we'll keep talking about them and fighting for them into the future.
Thank you. Minister for Health and Ageing and Member for Hindmarsh.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, last Sunday at the Grange Surf Lifesaving Club in my electorate, I was delighted to launch the government's $10 million national skin cancer prevention campaign Overcoming Summers, delivered in partnership with the wonderful Cancer Council of Australia. Unfortunately, our culture of fun in the sun here in Australia has resulted in thousands of Australians being diagnosed with skin cancer each year, among the highest rates in the world. That's why this cancer is sometimes called our national cancer. And tragically, skin cancer claims the lives of more than 2,000 Australians every single year. Well, that's a number we're determined to reduce. The campaign begins this week and is built around the well-known Sun Smart messages that we're all familiar with. With overexposure to UV radiation causing 95% of melanomas, Australians are reminded to use the 5 forms of sun protection whenever the UV level is over 3, or 3 or above actually. Slip on sun protective clothing, slop on broad-spectrum water-resistant SPF 30 or higher sunscreen, slap on a broad-brimmed hat, seek shade and slide on sunglasses. This is a really important campaign, and it's particularly important to get the message out to men, because almost twice as many men as women die from melanoma every single year. And new research from the Cancer Council shows that less than half of Australian men actively seek shade to protect themselves, and less than a third regularly use sunscreen. This new research tells us that more needs to be done to remind people of those easy steps that we can all take to reduce our risk of skin cancer every day. I was joined at the launch by John Clements from Adelaide, a survivor of skin cancer himself, and he said at the launch, "I grew up in a time when no one knew better. We'd run around on the beach with just our bathers on, trying to get a tan. My life and that of my 2 brothers would have been much better had we covered our skin up. I was a bit blasé about my health back in the day, like a lot of blokes. And now if I'm out in the sun at all, I make sure to protect myself." John and I exchanged stories of being young in the 80s and the 70s, lying out in the sun with baby oil or coconut oil on ourselves, actually seeking to fry and to tan before we knew what we know now about the cancer risks. Madam Deputy Speaker, sun protection saves lives, and the Albanese government will continue to work with our expert partners to save as many Australian lives as possible from this, the most preventable of all cancers. So as we approach summer, it's important that we all protect ourselves from the sun and reduce our risk of skin cancer by following those 5 easy steps from the Cancer Council.
Thank you. Member for Petrie.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, today I'd like to talk to someone who's very important to the people of Petrie, in particular the people in the postcodes of 4017, 4034 and 4036, and someone I've known since I was 3 years of age. Deputy Speaker, the person I'd like to talk about today is my GP, my doctor, Dr Karen Curtin, also known as Kerry Curtin. Not only is he my GP, but he's been the GP to literally thousands of people in the Bracken Ridge, Bald Hills, Castledine and Brisbane City Council region. Dr Curtin grew up in the Petrie area in Moreton Bay. He graduated from the University of Queensland back in 1971 with a Bachelor of Medicine and a Bachelor of Surgery. For over 50 years he has worked as a GP. He first opened his own practice in Bracken Ridge way back in 1975, and for more than 40 years he worked there before selling the practice and moving to Smart Clinics at Castledine. He's married to Nicole, and together they've had 3 children. One of his daughters is a doctor herself, Diane, and they had 6 grandchildren. He's got a great bedside manner. Not only is he a good doctor, but I remember when I was younger, he'd always ask me about my work, what I was doing, He talked about when he had time off, he was off to Fraser in his Land Cruiser, and today, of course, it's all about his grandchildren and making sure he's looking out for them and helping them. But Franca, who's been a long-term worker of his at Bracken Ridge and now at Castledine, said that he is just a fantastic GP. He will do anything to make sure his patients receive quality and thorough care, and he has always worked very hard and put in long hours to make sure no one that needs his care is missed. He takes care of his staff and has always been a good boss. Melinda, who is the practice manager at Smart Clinics Castledine, said that not only is he a great GP, Dr Curtin, but he is a great friend and a great colleague, and we all want that in our work colleagues. He's a lot of fun, he's knowledgeable, always considerate, and all-round a great guy. Now, Deputy Speaker, the relationship, as you'd know, between GP and patient is one that is fundamental to good long-term health care, and I can attest to having the same GP since I was a doctor. He's been a brilliant GP. Not only has he helped me, but he's helped many people in my electorate, and I want to thank him for working so long. I mean, for working so long. He could have retired years ago. In the new year, he'll be switching to part-time, but he will certainly be missed when he retires one day, and I want to speak on behalf of everyone and say thank you, Dr Kerry Curtin.
Thank you. Member for Cunningham.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Last month I had the honour of hosting a local Year 10 student, Dakota Montgomery, for work experience in my Wollongong electorate office. Dakota was professional, punctual, a hard worker and a problem solver. She is also a passionate advocate when it comes to children's mental health, and she has prepared this speech for me. Being an adult, we are extremely aware of how mental health can affect day-to-day life. Emotional, psychological and social well-being are all factors that associate with an individual's mental health. It affects how a person acts, feels and how they think, as it helps a person react to stressful situations and choices made. As adults, parents and children, we are taught the effects that this has on the brain. While adults suffer with mental health a lot, I think sometimes we forget that kids nowadays are also experiencing this just as much but aren't as recognised. Around 1 in 7 children aged from 4 to 17 have and are experiencing health disorders in Australia. The 3 common disorders are ADHD, anxiety and depression. This can be influenced by family circumstances, life events and school life, being one of the most common, as school can involve stress, bullying, anxiety and depression. There can be many cases that involve a child's mental health getting the better of them, making them believe that life would be better if they took matters into their own hands, which isn't the case. Children can feel as if they are not wanted around others or not loved by those that they are to call family, when in reality sometimes that isn't the case. Please understand that a child's mental health is just as important as an adult's, and help them to know that they are and always will be wanted and loved. These are beautiful and heartfelt words from an amazing young woman who has a huge future ahead of her. Dakota's mum, Kylie Montgomery, is also a fierce advocate for mental health. I first met Kylie during the Marriage Equality campaign, and her passion and enthusiasm for social justice resonated with me, and we're now quite good friends. Kylie is a cake maker and decorator by trade and operates her own small business called One Cake Down. After a personal loss in Kylie's family, she dedicated all of her profits from the sale of off-cut boxes in October to a local mental health charity and social movement called Talk to Me Bro. The offcuts from Kylie's amazing cakes go into fully recyclable packaging for an amazing dessert in many different flavours, and all funds go each month to a different charity. Kylie raised $500 to support Talk to Me Bro and has been tirelessly advocating for them in the local media and on her own social media. To the entire Montgomery family, Dakota, Kylie and Talon, who is a member of the 26 Army Cadets Unit in Wollongong, thank you for all that you do in our community. The world needs more people like you.
Thank you. And the member for Sturt.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, I'm very pleased to join with my colleague, the member for Adelaide, in forming the Parliamentary Friends of Space Industry, which is an exciting, vibrant sector which is going to grow exponentially in the years ahead. We've held 2 events in the last week. In fact, I've literally just come from one, the Pine and Partners Tastes of Space event here on level 2, and last week the Industry Association also held an event. And it's been a great opportunity for the member for Adelaide and I to bring representatives from the industry into the building to meet fellow members of Parliament who have an interest in this industry and talk to them about what their needs are from government into the future. And the most obvious one, which I think we'd all agree with, is that they really do want all of us to work together as members of Parliament to back their industry and hopefully have consistency of policy and approach from all of the major parties in this building. And certainly I think we've got a high likelihood of that being the case. There are some things that we argue about in politics, quite rightly. We should have our debates, but the future of the space industry is one that I'm sure we can form very much a unity ticket around. And the opportunities are enormous, but the consistency of government policy and decisions in that area need to be maintained with as little disruption as possible. And so the member for Adelaide and I are both very committed to being a part of achieving that consensus and also being a conduit for the industry to bring issues into this building, whether it's direct into the executive government or also to other parliamentarians, not just around what their legislative needs might be, but also developing a greater awareness amongst our leaders here in this building about this sector and where they're heading into the future. There are literally tens of thousands of jobs to be created in the space industry. There's no dispute about that whatsoever. It's going to be the fastest growing industry sector in our economy, something to be really excited about and something of an opportunity to be shared throughout the nation, although obviously the member for Adelaide and I are very jealously looking for as much benefit for our home state of South Australia, and given we've got the Space Agency headquartered there and the opportunities that flow out of defence procurement into space, we're hopeful of a very significant benefit to the South Australian economy. But the opportunities will be there throughout the country. It'll be an enormous outcome for the industries that get the benefit from the technology that space brings as well. So I'm thrilled that we've formed this group, and I look forward to being a part of raising their issues and their awareness in this building into the future.
Thank you. Member for Parramatta.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. People from across Australia have caught World Cup fever, and while we all cheer on the Socceroos halfway across the globe, I'm reminded that Australia's global success is built on the foundations of local soccer. And Parramatta has a thriving local soccer scene. It's home to the Granville District Soccer Football Association. Founded in 1900, Granville is the oldest football association, not just in Australia, but in the entire Southern Hemisphere. And today, over 6,000 girls and boys are registered players. It boasts a terrific array of clubs, including Rydalmere, Dundas, Merrylands, Holroyd and the Granville Waratahs. Parramatta is also home to the Parramatta Eagles, also known as Parramatta FC, the local representative pathway into elite football. Formed in 1956, it has helped make Parramatta the nursery of football talent it is today. In fact, Mitch Duke, who scored the winning goal against Tunisia on Friday night, started out his career with the club. Much of the success of local football in Parramatta is thanks to the dedication of the volunteers and club presidents. They've given their time and devoted decades of their lives to build these sporting clubs up and to foster the communities around them. I want to pay tribute to Noel Donner, President of the Granville Waratahs. Noel has dedicated decades to helping young girls and boys reach their potential in the sport. And if Noel's football success isn't impressive enough, he also does a killer sausage sizzle. I also want to pay tribute to the President of Rydalmere FC, Peter Basher. In July, Peter invited me on a tour of their facility. And what really resonated with me was the sense of community that had grown up around the club and around the sport. The club has become a place where families have dinner, where locals have a drink, and where friends come to celebrate their birthdays and other community milestones. This strong sense of community, fostered by people like Noel and Peter, is what helps make local football so special. And at 2 a.m. on Thursday morning, as Australia faces off against Denmark in our must-win encounter, I'll be proudly cheering the Socceroos on alongside the thousands of people who play football at one of the many great clubs across Parramatta.
Thank you. Member for Wannon.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. And I rise this afternoon to commend two local families from southwest Victoria, the Barkla and the McConnell families, who have set up an organisation called We've Got You, and it is to help and support those who have been through child bereavement, in particular perinatal loss. These courageous families have suffered, but they have set about ensuring that others don't have to suffer like they did. They lost young ones and weren't provided with the necessary support, the necessary counselling, the necessary space to be able to deal with the perinatal loss that they faced. So what they've done is they've set up an organisation called We've Got You to raise funds to enable others who suffer a similar loss to get the support that they need at that time. They've raised funds and set about asking the local hospital, South West Healthcare, to be able to provide a room for those who suffer perinatal loss so that they have the space to be able to deal with the loss that they've encountered. And they've also raised funds so that they can begin an information campaign. So for those wonderful nurses, midwives and everyone else who provides help and support in the hospital or outside of the hospital can provide the assistance and the services and the information to those who suffer perinatal loss. They are remarkable families, and I've had the honour and privilege to meet with them, to be in an ongoing discussion with them as they seek to ensure that others, and sadly there will be others who suffer a similar loss that they have, that they will have the space and the room to be able to deal with that loss, but also that we will also ensure that those that provide the much needed support and counselling services know and understand the loss that will be felt and how best to support those families in that time of need. I commend them for what they have done and continue to do on behalf of South West community.
Thank you. Member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, about 17,000 patients at the Bendigo Primary Care Clinic in Bendigo, that's how many they have on their books, received a worrying text last week and email. This email and text advised them that the clinic was moving from its bulk billing method of all patients to the private billing for fee service, meaning that people would have to pay a gap fee. Immediately, my office started to receive calls, and I want to thank all those who did reach out. It's heartbreaking to see our biggest bulk billing clinic in Greater Bendigo, and in fact my electorate, go down this path. For so long they had held out. One by one, other clinics in the area, because of rising costs and because of the impact of the previous government's decisions around Medicare, had gone down the private billing model. It had put lots of pressure on those who had left in the sector. We'd also have had another bulk billing service, the TriStar service, actually go broke as well, as a result of the previous government's actions on Medicare. And what did they do to create this? Well, one measure that they did that created such a problem for our GPs was that they froze Medicare rebates, not just 1 year, but for many years. In fact, it started in 2014 in their first budget, and every year GPs did not receive an increase. The freeze ended in the May budget in 2020. It took a pandemic, essentially, for the freeze to come off and for GPs to get an increase. But it hasn't made up the difference. The cost for GPs to deliver services has become harder and harder. And I do feel for a lot of our GPs who are quite overworked, who are struggling to keep up with patient loads as more and more GPs drop out because of the system. Many GPs in regional areas are essentially a small business, and they rely upon a Medicare rebate to help cover the costs. So I say to all the GPs in my area, I know that it's tough, but please hang in there. This government has a plan. This government is going to invest $1 billion into Medicare, $750 million to look at rebates in Medicare, and $250 million to help you with your practices. To the patients and to their clients, I say hang in there. It will get better because we are working to improve the system. It's going to take time, but this government, the Labor government, believes in Medicare. We will reinvest and rebuild Medicare, not like the previous government who left it in ruins.
Thank you. And in accordance with Standing Order 193, the time for members' constituency statements has concluded. I'll call on the clerk for the next item of business.
Government business statement number 1, further statements on floods.
Are there any statements? I give the call to the member for Nichols.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'd just like to update the chamber on where my electorate's up to. It's been a really tough time for the people of Nichols. Obviously, there was a huge rain event in the catchment of the Goulburn River around Eildon, which was already full, Eildon Weir, and around that area. And obviously, the catchment was already charged in that the soils were full of water. So any rain there was ran into the river, and this caused a serious swell, which hit the town of Seymour very hard. And there was some flash flooding in the lower parts of Seymour that damaged houses and businesses. And I toured Seymour very shortly afterwards with Minister Senator Murray Watt and the local representative Steph Ryan and Jacqueline Symes, who's the Attorney General in the Victorian Government. And we talked to business owners about what had happened, and we tried to give them some comfort that we were all working together across party lines to make sure that they were looked after. The water then moved downstream, slowing down but also rising as it picked up more from the catchment. And as it got to Murchison, it reached almost record highs and inundated many businesses and houses, including Murchison Winery, wonderful business, and didn't quite get to the cellar door, but it did get into their where their barrels are kept. Also, some of the businesses around Nagambie were badly affected, and some heroic actions that I'd like to talk about, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Around Nagambie, there was a lot of racing studs there, and a lot of foals were picked up by the water, and very courageously people went out in little tinny boats and pulled foals into the boat and took them to safety. So, you know, just really the way communities come together and help each other and show enormous bravery in these situations to people, but also to animals and livestock, is to be commended. And what happened also was that the flooding, the Broken River and the Goulburn River junction at Shepparton, and they both received huge amounts of rainfall at the same time, and they peaked at the same time, which affected Shepparton, parts of Shepparton quite badly. I just do want to reflect for a moment that there are some new estates, including one called the Boulevard Estate, designed very recently by Spire, and the Spire team worked with a developer to realise the value of this block of land, and it was low-lying and subject to flooding, but they were able to create higher and better land, increasing the size of the development by 250 residential lots, and undertook a complex draining analysis to assist rezoning request. What all that means is basically that the water filled up the streets but didn't inundate the houses in that area, whereas some of the older estates, they were. So I think we've got a lot we can learn about design and being able to make sure that these places, there's somewhere for the water to go and it's not into people's houses, Mr Deputy Speaker. But the water did move over and badly affect Mooroopna, and Mooroopna is on the other side of the Goulburn River from Shepparton, and the water hit many areas of Mooroopna very badly, and it was devastating to see the impact, and as the water receded, just how much had been destroyed. It's very difficult, and I'll explain in a moment where I was, but it's very difficult to go into people's houses in those circumstances and see children's toys and personal items ruined, and to help take them out of flood-affected houses. I just want to mention and commend the Mooroopna Football Netball Club that got over almost 300 volunteers to come together with utes, cars with trailers. The council opened up the tip for free, and at least the people who were going through the devastating process of taking destroyed goods out of their house, and in some cases needed help to do that, putting them on the nature strip, they had their neighbours coming along and picking them up and taking them to the tip. It was one less thing they had to worry about, and it was a great example of communities coming together, and I was involved in that and very proud to be involved in that with the Mooroopna Football Netball Club. Just the ADF did an amazing job also, and so I thank them, and an organisation called FoodShare, which we actually gave a grant to prior to the election but wasn't signed off on, but the current government did sign off on that, so I thank them for that. FoodShare delivered parcels of food to people who weren't able to get out of their houses because of the floodwaters. An amazing community response. And just to report that the Goulburn River's only just dropped below minor flood level, and for the first time in months, and that was on Sunday, and it's hoped it will stay that way so we can allow people to recover, and the water continues to recede from some of the estates that remain that have some inundation. Look, it's hard to compare one bad region with another bad region, but I have to say that the town of Rochester was devastated by the flooding. This time it was a different river, the Campaspe River, over to the west of my electorate. Absolutely devastated by the flooding. It broke its banks. Rochester had been through this in 2011. It had rebuilt. This flood was worse. It broke the banks, rose and went through the CBD of the town. Over 90% of the houses were inundated, and we're still working through trying to find how we house some of those people. I would like to pay tribute among the many people in Rochester, but to local champion Lee Wilson, who has been working with the community to advocate for their cause, and I'm in constant contact with him, and just being that person who checks that everyone's okay and who helps coordinate the effort of recovery for people. And Lee's own mother, 83-year-old Lorraine Wilson, her house was inundated, and quite a sight to see her trying to pick up photos of her late husband from the 50s that had been swept away in the floodwaters. And also, not only did it affect the township of Rochester, but there were some farms significantly impacted, including one farm in Nanilla that I visited with the Minister for, former Minister, Shadow Minister for Agriculture and member for Maranoa, and it was just a beautiful farm. He had lucerne ready to go. The cows, he laid down straw in the barn. The cows were so well housed. Pastures were perfect. It had been such a good year, and then this water just came through and took that all away, and the rebuild for him is very difficult. The water sort of then from the Goulburn and so I told you about the junction in Shepparton before. The junction in Echuca is the Campaspe and the Goulburn. So when that happened, the floodwaters rose in Echuca. Now they had more time to prepare and they quickly put up a makeshift levy bank. Now, it was quite controversial because there were some houses that needed to be on one side of it, but touring it with the Campaspe Shire Council, it does appear that that levy did work, and that it did, that even though there were houses that were inundated, it did protect a lot more. So, you know, I think that effort and that quick thinking and that quick decision making is to be commended, though I know that there are some people who've got some concerns there. I would just like to say that, you know, I'm a new member to this place, Mr Deputy Speaker. I came up here to work constructively with everyone and just to represent my people as best I could, and the assistance that I've got from the Minister for Emergency Services, Senator Watt, and that's us.
A division has been called for in the House. The proceedings are suspended to enable honourable members to attend the division. The proceedings will resume when the Chair of the Federation Chamber is resumed at the conclusion of the division or subsequent divisions.
Better not be quorum.
Well, I was going to give the call to the member for Nichols in continuation. Does anyone know if he's about to walk in the door? He didn't. Is he done? I finished. Okay. Well, are there any further speakers on this matter? There being no further speakers, I call the clerk.
Government business, statement number 2, further statements on death of Judith Durham, AO.
Are there any statements? And I give the call to the Minister for Northern Australia and the Minister for Resources.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Speaker. I rise today to express and pay tribute to Judith Durham and to extend my deepest sympathies to her family and loved ones. Born in July 1943, she was lost to the nation on the 5th of August this year. Few Australians have had their voices heard around the world in the way that Judith did. At a time of great social and political upheaval, Judith's voice was something that all generations were able to appreciate and enjoy. Judith was an extremely talented and accomplished woman who took the sound of Australia to the rest of the world as the voice of the seekers. Judith's father, William Koch, was a World War II navigator and pathfinder, and Judith too would play the role of pathfinder for the many, many Australian acts that would follow the seekers over the coming decades to find success in the UK and America. They blazed a path that would later be trod by the likes of the Easy Beats and ultimately Australian mega groups like INXS and AC/DC. Both have origins in Western Australia, of course, and I cannot not mention that. The modern Australian music industry has so much to thank Judith Durham for. Judith was a classically trained singer and pianist. After school, she met Athol Gray, who invited her to join with Bruce Woodley and Keith Potcher to sing in the then unknown harmony and folk group The Seekers. Like so many Australian acts, The Seekers sailed to UK as the onboard entertainment aboard a cruise ship, thinking that their adventure would last no more than just a few weeks. But in 1965, their song, I'll Never Find Another You, recorded at Abbey Road Studios, was a #1 hit in both the UK and Australia. The Seekers were named Best New Group at the top of the Pop Awards. It was their greatest hit, Georgie Girl, that saw them become the first Australian group to reach #1 in the USA. The song would also be nominated for an Oscar. They were the first ever group to reach #1 in the UK charts with their first 3 singles, a record that was never matched by the likes of Michael Jackson or Madonna. Judith married her musical director, pianist Rog Edworth, and they performed around the world. After Ron tragically died of motor neuron disease in 1994, Judith would become patron of Motor Neuron Disease Australia Association and would work tirelessly in promoting the charity. In 1995, Judith was honoured with the Medal of the Order of Australia for her services to music, a much-deserved recognition of her contribution to music in Australia and around the world. The significance of Judith Durham's contribution to the cultural life of this country cannot be overstated. She carried the early sounds of a nation finding its voice to the rest of the globe, and her passing is a great national loss.
Are there any statements? And I give the call to the member for Sturt.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker, and I too rise to pay tribute to Judith Durham AO at her sad passing a few months ago. And I'm very wary of not being insulting to those in the chamber that are slightly older than me, but when I think of Judith Durham, I do think of a different era to my own. But
member for Sturt, reflecting on the chair.
But one of great nostalgia, one of perhaps more my parents' era than my own. But I also think if you're watching any reflections on that period of time in this country, the soundtrack has to be of the Seekers playing in the background. And certainly my father, much like myself, I've inherited many of his poor attributes, and one is a great passion for music and music history. And growing up with music of the Seekers and other music from that era, the first thing I always reflect on with the Seekers is that before the Seekers we had some excellent musical talent in this country, but it was still the international, particularly American music and UK music that would dominate here in Australia so substantially. And you see footage of the rare Hollywood celebrity or British music act that would come to Australia, and everyone would, of course, flock to hear the concerts and even see them driving past when the Beatles came to anywhere in the country. Adelaide's got the same story as anywhere else about effectively the city coming to a standstill because that group, an excellent group, but also one that had come across the tyranny of distance to Australia, was so excitingly embraced by the people. So the Seekers, in my view, and a lot of people would perhaps dispute this and talk about other great entertainers from that era or just prior to that era, but I do think the Seekers, it's fair to say, were the first truly globally successful Australian music group, and particularly in the markets of all markets, the United States, and in their era in the 60s, to be making it onto the charts and topping the charts at times. When you look at some of the competition they had, they absolutely were trailblazers, led by the great Judith Durham, of course, and her beautiful, beautiful vocals, and also the lovely character and presence that she had on stage with her voice, and of course the way in which she conducted herself at a time when a lot of musicians and entertainers were deciding to be misbehaved more than behaved to get attention and to perhaps meet the zeitgeist of being a rebellious entertainer in the 1960s. Judith Durham was a brilliant entertainer, but also someone that genuinely made all Australians proud as she, with the Seekers and through her solo career, pursued and achieved such success, and of course always came home to Australia as well and absolutely loved Australia. The Seekers, I think it was 1966 or 67 that they jointly were the Joint Australians of the Year. So that, I think, is a fitting accolade and a demonstration of just how significant they were in our society at the time. So the passing of Judith Durham really is the ending of an era, but it's also such a spectacular legacy that she leaves behind. All of us can hum many a Seekers song that she sang that have, of course, been so enduring well beyond the period in which they topped the charts. And so it is fitting that we've taken this opportunity, and I certainly join with other members in paying tribute to the life, achievements and acknowledge and mourn the passing of Judith Durham.
Are there any statements? And I give the call to the Assistant Minister to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. On 5 August 2022, we lost an icon of Australian music in Judith Durham, AO. Born in Essendon to William Cock and Hazel Durham, she grew up between Victoria and Tasmania. She received formal training as a pianist from the University of Melbourne Conservatorium. Her singing career began at 18 years of age out of sheer persistence. She frequented the Memphis Jazz Club and asked week after week to get on stage. Band leader would tell her, come back next week. And so she'd come back next week. And again, she'd be dismissed, come back next week. And she kept going to that jazz club until finally, week after week, they let her on stage. And then, having rejected this amazing singer for so long, everyone in the room was blown away by her voice. She met her, who became lifelong friends, Atul Gai, Keith Podger and Bruce Woodley in 1962, and they became The Seekers, releasing their debut album in 1963, introducing The Seekers. And their recording of Waltzing Matilda reached the Melbourne Top 40. They saw enormous success with songs such as I'll Never Find Another You, World of Our Own, The Carnival Is Over and Georgie Girl. And I need to note that, of course, their song I Am Australian, which still blasts out on my television screen on ABC Kids on a regular basis, bringing half my household, causing half my household to break out into song, is still a favourite of many. And one of the things that I wanted to share with the Parliament today was that one of the unexpected outpourings of love for Judith Durham that we saw was that the number of letters that were sent to the Australian government in advocacy, in good-hearted advocacy, that I Am Australian should be considered as our new national anthem. Now that is not going to happen. We will not be going to a vote for a new national anthem. But I did have the joy on behalf of the Prime Minister of responding to hundreds and hundreds of letters from people who shared their love of this incredible Australian musician and the music that captured so much of this nation. And again, I thank everyone who wrote in with their good-hearted suggestions on that particular topic. Every one of those songs sold, that I just mentioned, sold over 1 million copies. Selling over 1 million copies of a song, particularly songs written in the 60s, released in Australia, is an incredible achievement for an Australian musical outfit. In 1968, another first, yet to be replicated, is that Durham and the entire group of the Seekers were named collectively as Australians of the Year. It was the 8th year of the Australian of the Year Awards, and it is still to this day the only time that a group has received the Australian of the Year Award. And I'd just say, particularly with the Special Envoy for the Arts here, that the musicians of 2022 need to lift their game. It is rightly fitting that such a brilliant musical team got that award, recognising their great contribution to Australia. Durham also had such a wonderful success as a solo artist, sharing that part of her musical journey with husband Ron Edgeworth. And then we saw some 2,000 people gather for her state memorial service, which included musical tributes from everyone from Dammy Yim through to the Wiggles. We saw her older sister Beverly recount, quote, "We'd sing together early in the morning. My father would have to come in and say, 'That's enough, your mother can't sleep.'" We had her Seekers bandmate said, "You are not, quote, you're not really alone because your picture is on my wall and your boundless spirit and love will be in my heart forever." Bruce Woodley told of Durham's struggles battling a serious lung disease through most of her career. Quote, "Her bravery and single-mindedness in overcoming the enormous physical obstacles that life threw at her has always been an inspiration to me, and indeed an inspiration to many." And we saw the Seekers play previously unreleased song in Carry Me, which Atul Gai said of the song, quote, "is now our collective gift to share with you tonight as we celebrate Judith's magnificent gifts to us all." And concluding with saying, "May it carry her safely on the rest of her journey." And I think we can all echo those sentiments, Deputy Speaker. Thank you.
I thank the member. Are there any statements? And I call the member for Riverina.
Beautiful person, beautiful voice. Judith Durham was a great Australian. She was a beautiful Australian. I've given up counting the number of times I've sung Georgie Girl to my daughter, Georgina, and still do, always will. And I know how much she and the rest of my family love Judith Durham, perhaps because of that song, but she gave so much, Judith Durham, to so many for so long. Her death at age 79 was mourned by people right across the nation. She was a fantastic singer, songwriter and musician. I know when Keith Potger visited Forbes for Australia Day celebrations in 2019, he spoke lovingly and fondly about Judith. Athol Guy, of course, Bruce Woodley. They will never forget the vibrance, the energy, the beauty she brought to the Seekers. And, of course, the Seekers, what a great group. Since 1962, they were one of the first bands of their mix of music to really top the charts and to do so well in the UK and elsewhere. And we mourn for Judith's loss because it brings about an end to a great era. And we know that how much she was mourned at the State Memorial Service held in September. It concluded with a special recording of Carry Me, a new song by the Speakers due for release late this year to celebrate the band's 60th anniversary. Just think about it, 6 decades. 6 decades of performing. 6 decades of... It is extraordinary, Member for Forrest. And the band shared a song Bruce Woodley had written 2 decades ago, and that song, Carry Me, was just fantastic. And of course, I am Australian. Who hasn't in this chamber, who hasn't across Australia, teared up about that song, because it is emblematic of us all. It's emblematic of our Indigenous brothers and sisters, of migrants to this nation. It speaks to the heart of Australia like no other song. And I know that the quotes that were made, the tributes that were paid to Judith Durham from such luminaries as Paul Kelly. Of course, we all love Paul Kelly, especially as we prepare for Christmas and making gravy, but his recorded tribute at the state funeral. But behind that sweetness and gentleness, there was a hidden steel and a strong independence of mind. She quietly and firmly went her own way, danced to her own drum. Truer words never spoken. Her sister Beverly Sheehan, her tribute at the Hammer Hall Memorial. Judith's joy for life, her constant optimism, creativity and generosity of spirit were always an inspiration to me. Indeed, they are an inspiration to all of us. May she rest in peace.
I thank the member. Are there any statements? And I call the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I grew up listening, firstly, to my mum's records, sitting cross-legged on the floor, and at some point I was allowed to put the vinyl on the record player myself when I could be trusted not to drop the needle too hard. The Seekers sing their big hits. The record that came out in 1965 when I was 2 was one of the very first records I listened to. A black and white photo of them in full voice was on the cover with a red edge around it, and it still brings back memories. It had a lot of content very suitable for small children: Waltzing Matilda, Lemon Tree, Morningtown Ride. It also had A World of Our Own and I'll Never Find Another You. I played it, sang along to it, learnt the early principles of harmony from Judith and the boys, Keith Podger, Bruce Woodley and Athol Guy. But it's Georgie Girl I remember hearing on the radio and loving the beat and loving the tune. At the time, I had no understanding that these songs were breaking ground internationally and putting Australian voices on the world stage. I just liked to sing along. My husband was much more aware of their stature than me at around about the same time. He was part of the Navy band that performed on stage with the Seekers at that famous 1967 Myer Music Bowl performance. I think it's the biggest audience he's ever performed to, and it was immortalised as it was in the Guinness Book of Records the following year as the biggest concert attendance ever in the Southern Hemisphere. Given the influence of Judith Durham on my early musical life, it was a real privilege to represent the Prime Minister at the Victorian State Memorial in her honour. And what a celebration of Judith Durham's life it was, with recognition from the Victorian Governor of her impact on the music scene. We gained insights into the health challenges that Judith had faced with such good humour throughout her life, and also her determination, kindness and generosity. And Athol, Keith and Bruce all demonstrated the affection that they had for Judith and their union. If you hadn't shed a tear before hearing them speak, this part of the night probably tipped a lot of people over. Judith's nephew, Tony Sheehan, shared a story about the singer's determination to perform at a jazz club as a young teenager. Apparently, she'd turn up at the same jazz club week after week, and the band leader kept saying, "Come back next week." When he finally allowed her to perform, you have to wonder how hard he kicked himself for not having said yes a whole lot sooner. Perhaps there's a message there for young performers and bookers alike. The musical tributes were exceptional. Professor Deborah Cheetham, Vicar and Linda Bull, David Campbell with his backing singers providing the harmonies that echoed the harmony the Seekers were so adept at, and Dami Im accompanied by Chong Lim and the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra's string quartet. It was a beautiful night, but perhaps the most personal performance was Jelly Bean Blues from Judith's big sister, Beverly Sheehan, accompanied by the Syncopators. The whole evening was a very Melbourne tribute, but had the heart of the whole country there to thank Judith's family for the musical gift that she gave the nation. Valet Judith Durham.
I thank the member. As there are no more statements, I'll call Clark.
Government business statements number 3, death of Dame Olivia Newton-John, AC DBE. Further statements.
Are there any statements? I call the member for Brand.
Thank you very much, Acting Deputy Speaker. I rise today to celebrate and recognise the life of an Australian icon, Dame Olivia Newton-John, AC DBE. Born in England in September 1948, Olivia Newton-John moved to Melbourne when she was 5 and made Australia her home. Later in life, she moved to the United States of America and was sadly lost to the world earlier this year in August. In addition to being one of this nation's greatest musical exports, Olivia was also a well-known animal rights and environmental campaigner and a breast cancer awareness advocate. Olivia was Australia's sweetheart. Olivia was an Australian icon who captivated the globe. Her first big break was appearing on a local pop talent TV program in 1963. With slowly growing renown, she would tour the UK and perform throughout Europe. Olivia achieved breakthrough fame in her role as Sandy in the 1978 hit film Grease. With John Travolta starring in the role of Danny, Grease was a smash hit musical that is now loved by many generations. The soundtrack to this film spent 12 weeks at #1, and I doubt there is a high school in this country that hasn't staged Grease the musical, and I certainly remember it from my high school days at Safety Bay Senior High School. I didn't perform because I don't perform, but I do remember attending, and I know it's a hit among the high school musical circuit. Olivia was the second woman to have 2 hits in the top 5 of the Billboard Hot 100 at the same time, with the tunes Summer Nights and Hopelessly Devoted to You. The Newton-John Travolta duo and the hit You're the One I Want was one of the top singles of all time, selling more than 15 million copies. Throughout her career, Olivia Newton-John won 4 Grammy Awards, along with a multitude of other awards for her musical and acting career. She had global sales of more than 100 million records. A life of such remarkable achievement, Olivia Newton-John also suffered a tremendous tragedy. She was first diagnosed with breast cancer in 1992, and she dedicated herself to raising awareness and promoting treatments while offering endless love and support to others struck by the same illness. In 2008, Olivia led a group of cancer survivors along a trek of the Great Wall of China, raising more than $2 million for charity. Through her tireless campaigns, she would eventually raise almost $200 million in funds to fight cancer. She opened the Olivia Newton-John Cancer and Wellness Centre in Melbourne in 2012. Today, this centre provides cancer patients with emotional support they need and provides a focus on wellbeing throughout treatment. Olivia Newton-John battled cancer 3 times and ultimately succumbed to the disease this year. But through all of these battles, she continued to advocate for others. And it's important we recognise the achievements of Dame Olivia Newton-John in this chamber, not as just one and an important one of Australia's entertainment acts, but also one of this nation's great campaigners. In fact, around the world she's been recognised. Of course, in 2019 she was made a Companion in the Order of Australia, and in the same year she was made a Dame Commander in the Order of the British Empire. And in 2021, the Japanese government awarded her an Order of the Rising Sun, a very rare accolade for a foreigner in Japan. Her musical and acting legacy will, of course, last forever. In school musicals of Greece, of course, and in the frequent rerunning of that musical, seemingly every 6 months, maybe more often on television, the movie in which she starred, a movie that can actually be quite challenging in terms of how it depicts relationships between teenage women and men in the late 1950s in the United States. But the soundtrack remains supreme. ONJ was of course more than Sandy in Greece, a talented artist, an amazing campaigner for animal welfare and an advocate for cancer victims around the world, and particularly in Australia. The loss of Olivia Newton-John is not just a loss for us as Australian fans, and of course a tremendous loss for her family and friends. It's a loss to the whole world. Vale, Dame Olivia Newton-John, AC DBE.
I thank the member. Are there any statements? And I call the member for Sturt.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I rise to speak on this motion of condolence at the death of Dame Olivia Newton-John. And it's fitting, serendipitously, that this motion is being debated just after we've talked about the passing of Judith Durham, because in many ways Olivia Newton-John replaced Judith Durham as one of the great Australian female singers and entertainers of the 70s, like Judith Durham was of the 60s. And as the previous speaker mentioned, I totally agree, she's a lot more than just being Sandy in Greece, but first and foremost, I suppose that is certainly how so many millions, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people came to know her. And one of those curses for any Australian that travels to America is that Americans think there are about 30 to 40 people that live in Australia, so they'll often ask you the question, are you from Australia? Do you know Olivia Newton-John? Or Paul Hogan? Well, Paul lives 3 houses down, but Olivia's 2 streets over from the one suburb on continental Australia. Her passing to me came as quite a shock. I very much regret that a few years ago I missed the opportunity to meet her when she was in this building, but a lot of members will remember that she was here and attended question time, doing the great work that she was doing to raise awareness in this building, like she raised so much money for cancer treatment. And of course she succumbed to her long battle with cancer, tragically, but the legacy that she leaves behind in this country around awareness and resourcing is one that is truly spectacular. So she was a very famous Australian, but we don't merely remember her as someone that was a very successful musician and actress, though she was, but she chose to use that success to make a really significant difference in our society in Australia and, frankly, around the globe. So it is a tragedy that she passed much sooner than any of us would wish that she did, but the legacy that she leaves behind is one of many, many lifetimes of contribution. So with those words, I pay tribute and reflect and, of course, mourn the passing of Dame Olivia Newton-John.
I thank the member. Are there any statements? And I call again the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I've spoken in this place about listening to my parents' records in my early years. Well, Olivia Newton-John's album was one of the very first that I bought by myself. In 1977, her greatest hits album was released, and at the age of about 14, it wasn't long before I owned it. I didn't realise I was listening to a crossover of country and pop, but I loved those songs. I think I still know most of the lyrics to Something Better to Do and Sam and Have You Never Been Mellow and I Honestly Love You. And we're just all pausing to see if that bell is for us. These were the songs of my teenage years, and I can picture myself sitting in the sunroom of my Strathfield home singing away, sadly not nearly as tuneful as Olivia herself. And then, of course, a year later, Grease was released, an eye-opener and solidifying in my teenage brain that Olivia was an absolute hero and star. The thing about the songs of your teenage years are that they return to you at different times and different points throughout your life. As I'd spend hours on the road in the mid-1980s, heading between Canberra and Sydney, I'd rotate through music new and old, and Olivia ended up on a cassette tape, one of those mixed tapes with my favourites. A 3-hour-plus drive provides a lot of time to sing along. So my tribute to Olivia Newton-John is a huge thank you. Thank you for being the soundtrack to heartbreak and joy, to homesickness and adventures. It wasn't until I came to Parliament, though, that I met Olivia in her role as an advocate for better support for cancer sufferers, and she used her own experience and her own money to further that cause. She was a compelling campaigner and leaves a huge legacy for this work. From her young days to her later years, she always was such a proud Australian, and I love that she never lost her Aussie accent, even though she was an international star. She loved this country and we loved her. Rest in peace, Dame Olivia Newton-John, AC DBE.
I thank the member. Are there any statements? And I call the member for Moncrieff.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Dame Olivia Newton-John, AC DBE, was born on 26 September 1948 in Cambridge, England, to Bryn and Irene. She was the youngest of 3 children, Hugh, her brother, and Rona, her sister. Olivia was 5 years old when her families immigrated to Melbourne on the SS Strathaired. Olivia wanted to be a vet, but doubted her ability to pass the science exams and turned instead to her other interest, performance. Olivia's first solo album was If Not For You in 1971, and it peaked at number 14 on the Australian charts and number 158 on the US Billboard 200, quite an achievement. Her second album, Olivia, 1972, had more success overseas, with the song Let Me Be There earning her a Grammy for Best Country Female and an Academy of Country Music Award for Most Promising Female Vocalist. In 1974, Olivia represented the UK in the Eurovision Song Contest with the song Long Live Love and placed 4th after ABBA, who won with Waterloo. Olivia's stardom would only grow, skyrocketing after she appeared alongside John Travolta in the cult classic Grease in 1978. And I was 10 years old in 1978, Deputy Speaker, and I'll talk about that influence a little bit later. Her most famous song was Physical, selling 10 million copies and earning her another Grammy. Olivia faced a long battle, as we know, with cancer, becoming one of Australia's most high-profile campaigners for the advancement of cancer research and treatment since her initial diagnosis of breast cancer in 1992, at the age of only 44. Cancer would return again in 2013 and 2017. She was a pioneer in the cancer field, and her legacy will continue in the work of world-leading research, treatment and care. Olivia founded the Olivia Newton-John Foundation to fund research into cancer therapies and the Olivia Newton-John Cancer Wellness and Research Centre, the ONJ Centre, in Melbourne, to support people on their journey with cancer. Olivia Newton-John was made a Dame in the Queen's New Year Honours list in 2019 in recognition of her services to charity, cancer research and entertainment, and she leaves behind her daughter Chloe and husband John Easterling. In 1978, I was 10 years old, Deputy Speaker, and I vividly remember the impact that Olivia Newton-John, Livy, as Australians fondly call her, on myself as a young girl from a low socio-economic background, living in South Australia, to see Olivia Newton-John up on the big screen with the curly hair, with the leather pants, transforming from Sandy, the girl next door, with a hair and a ponytail, to a superstar on the big screen, was quite something of an inspiration, not just to me, but to young girls across the country, and indeed across the world, ultimately. Songs like Hopelessly Devoted to You, Sam, I Honestly Love You, these are songs that inspired me during high school to actually become a singer. And I enjoyed a career as a saxophonist, as many know in this place. And a good one. Thank you. I'll take that interjection. And, of course, a vocalist. And that was, a lot of that was largely due to the inspiration of Olivia Newton-John. She was someone that everybody wanted to be near. She was someone that everybody wanted to be like. And those songs that I outlined were those that I learned in my singing lessons every week, diligently, making sure that I could belt out Olivia Newton-John's Hopelessly Devoted to You at school concerts, of course, in the music room at lunchtime, on the piano, and I still do, to this day, in my office, have at least half a dozen Olivia Newton-John songs and a piano, so I invite anybody, any of my colleagues, to come in and have a bit of karaoke, member for North Sydney, to sing Hopelessly Devoted to You in my office. But those memories of Olivia as a superstar, as a singer, as the girl next door, as a role model, remain, and she had such a massive impact on me and my sister as well, who was older than I at the time, and our young life and what we wanted to do with our lives. She was a fierce advocate for cancer, and I realised the childhood dream when I met Olivia in September 2019 when she came to Parliament House, to this place, and we were able to meet her in the Dame Tagney room and meet with her, talk about her cancer research and how much money and energy that she had also put into that for others. She was a kind soul. She was a talented woman. She was a much-loved mother and wife. She will be sadly missed. She was a movie star. She was a singer. But most of all, she really was Australia's favourite daughter. Olivia's been part of our lives since I can remember being inspired by her as a young girl. She means different things to so many different people around this country, but she will always live on in our hearts forever. Vale Olivia Newton-John.
I thank the member. Are there any statements? And I call the member for Perth.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. On the 8th of August 2022, Australia and indeed the world learned of Olivia Newton-John's passing. And while we recognise her great contribution as an Australian artist, she was an Australian artist who had an impact the world over. Born in Cambridge, England, but emigrated to Melbourne as a young child. I learnt in researching for this, she went to primary school with Darryl Braithwaite, another Aussie talent. And it was in these early years of Aussie education that she was drawn to performing, and so many of us are so fortunate that she was. Her talent took her across Europe with a range of different joint and solo acts, but it was in 1978 that she took the role of Sandy in the film adaptation of the musical Grease. That changed her life and it changed cinema, and it was also such a huge moment for Australians seeing an Australian accent in a big budget blockbuster film. Grease became the biggest box office hit of 1978. The soundtrack was arguably even bigger. And then from that film forward, Olivia's image was known across the world. Her musical career then transitioned in the 1980s. Xanadu, which draws strong opinions in this place. The musical fantasy film baptised the decade that year of 1980 was one contribution, but it was the double platinum album, the breakthrough album Physical, which really cemented her status as an international pop icon. She managed to get that song banned by 2 Utah radio stations during the peak of its popularity, something that artists have to try a lot harder to have their music banned today. She was a well-known Carlton supporter, and clearly one of her most proud achievements was to perform at the 1986 VFL Grand Final between Carlton and Hawthorn. And then her life changed again in 1992 when she was diagnosed with breast cancer. She would take that in her stride and become globally known as an advocate for people affected by breast cancer, and for, in large part, she did drive large investments in breast cancer research. She knew the grief, she knew the illness, and connected so deeply with many Australians who were going through that grief and illness themselves, and again, touched the lives of so many, but particularly touched the lives of people here in Australia. I just want to share a few of her reflections on some of those iconic moments I've mentioned, which is, she talked about Greece, the success of Greece, and in that she said, quote, "The young kids are rediscovering it every 10 years or so, it seems." And that definitely has been true over the 44 years that film has been out in the public, and I'm sure for every 10 years or so for the future, that film will continue to be rediscovered, and people will read it in different ways from how it was when it was first written, but it still is one of those great iconic musicals with a uniquely Australian flavour. And then on her illness, she reflected, quote, "My cancer scare changed my life. I'm grateful for every new healthy day I have. It has helped me prioritise my life." And again, prioritise her life she did. She chose to be an advocate for people who were experiencing illness. She chose to be an advocate, recognising that we could do so much more for those who are suffering from breast cancer. And she chose to be an advocate that that doesn't have to be the norm, that through research and through investment, philanthropic, business and government, we can start to shift the dial on that disease that still to this day affects too many. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
I thank the member. Are there any statements? And I call the member for Riverina.
In 1981, when I got my first car, it was a little blue Gemini, 4-cylinder. My wife, Catherine, often reminds me that if but for her, I'd still be driving it. It's probably true. But I wasn't happy with the Holden Gemini's sound system, so I got an equaliser put in, and it used to pump out the tracks. And I had some tracks. I had some cassette tapes in that car. I had Back in Black by Akadaka, AC/DC. I had Old 55. In fact, I also had the greatest hits by Olivia Newton-John, and I can remember singing along with those songs both in the car and indeed at home with my sisters Denise and Robin, who just loved Olivia Newton-John. And didn't we all? And why wouldn't we? Because she was a beautiful, beautiful person. She was born in Britain, but we certainly adopted her. We certainly loved her, as we should. And of course, who will forget Sandy in Greece? What a great movie, what a great musical. Indeed, John Travolta, upon Olivia's death, said, "My dearest Olivia, you made all of our lives so much better. Your impact was incredible. I love you so much. We will see you down the road and we will all be together again. Yours from the first moment I saw you and forever. Your Danny, your John." And I can remember when Olivia came to Parliament and she was sitting there in question time, and I was answering a question and I was being given what for by those opposite. Probably the member for McEwen was the loudest. And I leaned across the dispatch box and I said, "Have you never been mellow?" And of course the next day I got criticised in various mainstream papers for who uses the word mellow? But indeed Olivia Newton-John used that word, and she sang it beautifully. She sang everything beautifully. Vale Olivia Newton-John.
I thank the member. Are there any statements from members? And I call the member for Adelaide.
Deputy Speaker, and in August, all Australians mourned the very sad passing of Olivia Newton-John on August the 8th, and I'm sure we all continue to miss her. She touched every Australian's life. She was an Australian icon. She died after a long battle with cancer, and she was first diagnosed with cancer in 1992. And since then, she's been a tireless fighter. She has not only fought the disease privately, but put her dedication and fame into raising awareness and better cures for cancer. And aside from bringing us endless joy, as we just heard the member for Riverina remind us about, endless joy with her music, films, smiles. How can you forget, of course, the movie Grease, and some of her songs as well. Olivia Newton-John was a tireless campaigner, a tireless fundraiser, especially in health and cancer research. She also launched the Olivia Newton-John Foundation to advocate for kinder treatments for cancer, including using everything from plant-based treatments, research, etc. She also lent her name to the Olivia Newton-John Cancer Research Institute based at the Austin Hospital in Melbourne. This foundation aims to help people live better with cancer and to defeat it. And Deputy Speaker, I had the honour of visiting this research centre in Melbourne a few years ago when I was chair of the Health and Ageing Committee. Through the request of one of their directors that I met here whilst Olivia was here promoting the Cancer Research Centre, I received an invite and saw firsthand the great work that they do. They work so hard to discover and develop breakthrough cancer therapies and are treating people here in Australia, and all through Olivia Newton-John's tireless work to get this centre up and running. It provides the best health outcomes for patients. At this institute, researchers work just metres away from where people receive treatment. So you've got the research centre and the hospital right next door that people receive their treatment, so there is a connect between the researching and the people seeking this treatment. This means that their scientific discoveries are rapidly translated into breakthrough clinical therapies. And this was Olivia's vision, to give kinder treatment to people with cancer through research, through ensuring that every facility that may have been required for people that were receiving treatment for cancer, they had it at their fingertips. And I remember walking through, and it was just such like a family atmosphere. It was a centre that was set up with kitchens, lounges, libraries, a whole range of things. So when people were there receiving their treatment, they felt at home. And there was also space for family members as well. And speaking to some of those patients that were there, couldn't speak highly of Olivia, highly enough of Olivia and the Research Centre. And Olivia Newton-John was a tireless supporter of this foundation and of people living with cancer. She was also an activist for environmental and animal rights causes. So she was an inspiration to so many of us, whether it was through her movies or through the songs that she sang. She inspired all of us, or through the advocacy for cancer. She was known for her energy, kindness, commitment to improving the lives of people living with cancer, and this was a source of light, encouragement and hope to many. When we heard people speak about Olivia Newton-John, the words people used over and over were warm-hearted, enthusiastic, dedicated, committed, full of energy, positive and joyous. In an interview she gave in 2022, she said, "I'm healthy, I'm strong. I think it's very important to keep that positive message in your head. You know, if you have a difficult moment, music is always the great healer." And I couldn't agree more, Deputy Speaker. I had the honour and pleasure of meeting her, as many people in this place had, when she had visited our Parliament to promote her cancer research. I spoke to her on both times and found her to be very humble and basically give you all the time in the world to have a discussion. I remember mentioning to her that we had a mutual friend in Adelaide, another actor, Chantal Conturi, who was very good friends with Olivia, and she asked me to pass on her regards. And when I did, it was just no one could speak highly enough of her. So I know that she will continue to bring joy, happiness through her music, through her videos, through her movies. Vale Olivia Newton-John.
I thank the member. Are there any further statements? Okay. I call the clerk.
The government business statements. Number 4, the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Further statements.
Are there any statements? And I call the member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Last week we observed the United Nations 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence, an international campaign against what is sadly the most pervasive human rights violation worldwide. This is a topic that's important to my community of North Sydney and to me personally, as a woman, a mother, a sister, a friend and a proud citizen of our nation. Australia is often recognised as an international leader in women's rights. In 1902, we became one of the first countries in the world to grant women the right to vote. In 1924, we elected our first woman to Parliament, the iconic Edith Cowan. And in the 1970s, under Prime Minister Gough Whitlam, we passed a series of legislative reforms to improve women's access to contraception, equal pay, early childhood education and divorce, which ultimately laid the groundwork for the fairer society we see today. We have fought to promote and defend women's rights on our own shores, as well as advocated for women's rights overseas through our foreign aid programs, peacekeeping contributions and engagements with bodies like the United Nations. But despite our ambitions and some progress towards equality, the reality is we still have a long way to go. Statistics show that gender-based violence in Australia is widespread. 53% of women have experienced sexual harassment. Just take a moment to look around this room or think about the women that you know. That means that over half of us have been made to feel unsafe or humiliated by unwanted sexual advances and behaviours. This reality is staggering. Disturbingly, the normalcy of this type of behaviour has often made it more difficult than necessary for it to not only be called out, but at times even be recognised. From my own personal experience, I know the feelings of self-doubt and shame that come when you're faced with harassment or abuse. The immediate question, what did I do to deserve this all, is all too easily asked. And the damage in this mindset, or this frame, is that it often melts across generations. And so it is that mothers pass to daughters, and mothers pass to daughters, and abuse has intergenerational consequences. This is compounded by the capacity of people to now harass and bully with impunity via social channels, something that has become far too frequent an occurrence since I took on this role. We know that not all disrespect to women results in violence, but all violence against women, indeed all violence, starts with disrespect. As a public figure, I've now been subject to gender-based bullying and harassment online, as I suspect many of my colleagues have. And I believe we'd all be subjected to a similar daily barrage of abuse from cowards hiding behind their keyboards. But even knowing this as I took on this role, some of the messages that I've received during this time have been truly breathtaking. With one of the more recent, and I'll apologise in advance for offence, saying, "You fucking ugly big nose slut, you're a fat cunt and climate change is bullshit." Public awareness of sexual violence has grown in recent years, thanks in part to brave women like Grace Tame, Brittany Higgins and Chanel Contos, who have opened up about their experiences and inspired others to do the same. In the words of the indomitable Grace Tame, "When we share, we heal, we reconnect and grow, both as individuals and as a united, strengthened collective. History, lived experience, the whole truth, unsanitised and unedited, is our greatest learning resource. It is what informs social and structural change. It was Brittany Higgins' courage that resulted in the Jenkins Review, whose recommendations are now playing out in the Respect at Work bill that passed the Senate last week. A survey conducted as part of that review found 1 in 3 people working in this building had personally experienced sexual harassment at work, and that over half of us had experienced at least one incident of bullying, harassment or assault. Those numbers are absolutely unacceptable, particularly when you consider the example we are setting in this House for workplaces around the country. As the highest office holders in our land, federal politicians must be held to the highest standards. We in this chamber must take the lead in putting an end to gender-based violence in Australia with our words, thoughts and deeds. By working with specialist organisations, states and territories to support and protect vulnerable women, strengthening our justice system, responses and services, and identifying and addressing problematic cultural norms that still stand in the way of true equality. The war against gender-based violence has many fronts, and I'm proud to represent a passionate and compassionate electorate that is contributing significantly to positive change. In 2016, a group of North Sydney residents came together to open Mary's House, a dedicated women's shelter for victims of domestic violence. As the shelter puts it, Mary's House is symbolic of the community's commitment to say no to domestic violence, to reduce risk of harm from domestic violence and to save lives. Most recently, I met with the organisers of a new grassroots effort to teach hairdressers how to recognise signs of domestic violence and help victims get the support they need. As many of us know, hairdressers not only cut hair, they sometimes also fill the role of de facto therapist and confidant for women visiting the salon. This makes hairdressers uniquely well placed to help educate the community about gender-based violence and support potential victims of abuse. It's a brilliant idea. The Northside Baptist Church and Crows Nest Community Centre, who are spearheading this effort, deserve all our thanks. I've spent much of my career working with advocacy groups towards a better, fairer, kinder society for all. I've seen the tremendous impact community-led initiatives like Mary's House, the Dolvina Refuge, Northside's Hairdressers Education Campaign and others like them can make to individuals in our society. Truly, people can do amazing things when we are united behind a common purpose. So today, as we observe the United Nations 16-day campaign, we in North Sydney call on our fellow Australians to unite against gender-based violence. Violence against women is a scourge on our civilised society. It's time to push forward to end violence against women and girls here and everywhere. Thank you.
Are there any statements? I call the member for Cowan.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Before I begin my speech, I'd just like to acknowledge all my sister survivor victims out there who are living with or recovering from family and domestic violence, and I want to take time to also pay my respects to all the women and children that we have lost. Far too many. Speaker, a home is supposed to represent a place of warmth, of comfort, affection and security. But we know that for many people in Australia, their home is a place of violence, a place of cruelty and a place of abuse. Last Friday was the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and it marked the beginning of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence and 16 days in Western Australia campaign to stop violence against women. I've been incredibly honoured over the years as many people from across Australia, women from across Australia, have confided in me and opened up to me and shared their most vulnerable selves with me, discussing their experiences of being a survivor or their experiences of supporting a relative as that relative flees a violent situation, or their experiences assisting a survivor as they reassemble the fragments of their life. And in every story, I can feel the pain, I can feel the sorrow, all too keenly. But I also know that there are many, many, many more stories out there, untold stories, stories belonging to those who are still in danger and who may never make it to safety. For too long, domestic violence has been a taboo topic in our society, but we can no longer deny it as part of the everyday life for millions of individuals. For too often, here in this country, we've looked at other societies and we have a habit of using the status of women as a yardstick of progress, measuring ourselves against those women in Iran or those women in other societies where perhaps they don't have as many freedoms or as many as much equality as we have here. But we need to stop doing this, because the fact is that domestic violence in Australia is alarmingly common. Alarmingly common. When we say goodbye to an average of 1 woman every 10 days, it's time to stop and think about just what it is within our own society that is perpetuating these high rates of domestic violence. We know that the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdowns only intensified violence, with an increased severity or frequency of violence, because survivors and perpetrators spent more time together and because of those pressures of economic hardship. But I also want to discuss the enormously harmful impacts of domestic violence on all members of a household. Domestic violence is not simply that children are exposed to when they reside with families, but they are survivors in their own right. There is rarely a situation in which children and teenagers are exposed to domestic violence without also being substantially affected by this violence. There is enough research out there about the impact of domestic violence on child's development and on young people, yet children are often treated only as witnesses, but not victims of domestic violence in and of themselves. And we need a trauma-informed approach to healing for both the mother and the children who are escaping family and domestic violence. Indeed, Speaker, homelessness is one of the most visible effects of domestic violence on young people. And a recent report by Mission Australia estimates that around 80% of homelessness among young people is due to domestic violence. Domestic violence, when it occurs between intimate partners, takes more victims, carries more victims than just those who are involved. And we need to recognise that children in domestic violence situations and young people in domestic violence situations are also victims and are also living with domestic violence. And when I think about the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, I think that it's apt that we start talking about these things. We start talking about the impact on children. And, you know, perhaps controversially, I'm also going to say this, I think we stop talking about domestic violence as being about respect, because I can tell you now that my husband, my ex-husband, the first one, respected the women that he worked for. He was perfectly capable of showing respect to the women that served him in the shops and the women that he worked with and the women he encountered in his everyday life. It's not about respect, it's about power. It's about time we started calling out domestic violence and the origins of domestic violence and why it occurs, and to speak about it in those terms. For all of those women out there who are living with the impacts of domestic violence, I hear you, I see you, I know you. I know what it's like to live with that trauma. I know that you carry it around with you no matter how far you've gone, no matter how far you've come in your life. And I often describe it as a tiny little broken bone, a crack somewhere in your body that you carry with you. You don't always feel it, but you always know it's there. That's trauma. That's the impact of the trauma of family and domestic violence, and it's a lifelong trauma. I've had women in their 70s come and talk to me about the violence that they suffered 40 years ago or 30 years ago. And I've had women in their 20s and teenagers come and talk to me about the violence that they are suffering now. And in closing, I'll say I'm proud to be a part of a government that takes domestic violence seriously. Proud to be part of a government that has a vision to eradicate violence against women and children in a generation. And I'm proud to be a part of a government that has recognised intersectionality in our plan to eradicate violence against women in that generation. Because the fact is, and the statistics are, that women of colour are less likely to be believed when they report violence and are more likely to be victims. So in closing, I just want to put out a message that if anyone out there who's listening needs help or support, or they know anyone who does, that there are services available, so please reach out. Reach out to 1800-RESPECT, to the Kids Helpline, to Crisis Care, to the Women's Domestic Violence Helpline, and many more. Violence against women needs to stop, and we all have a part to play, every single one of us, men, women and children. But it won't stop if we don't talk about it. So let's use these 16 days of activism to talk about it. Thank you.
Before we proceed, could I just ask the member for North Sydney, I didn't want to raise this to break the rhythm of your address, and I fully respect the context of your remarks, but you did make two unparliamentary remarks, and could you assist the House by withdrawing those?
Yes, Deputy Speaker. Yes, I do withdraw them. I did share them with the intent of being accurate in what was said to me, but I do understand the need to withdraw them.
Thank you for your assistance. Are there any statements? I call the member for Wentworth.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. It is a privilege to speak on this motion today, but I think we would all prefer to live in a world where such motions weren't necessary, a world where violence against women wasn't such a widespread danger. But we don't live in that world, and we won't live in that world until we change our culture. This is a global problem, but violence against women is tragically common in Australia. The Bureau of Statistics has found that 1 in 3 Australian women, 15 years or older, has experienced physical violence. 1 in 3. And 1 in 5 Australian women have experienced sexual violence. We've all heard stories from our friends and our families. We know how prevalent it is. We know that the majority of this violence is the product of men who are known to the victim. I represent the community of Wentworth in Sydney's eastern suburbs. We are, relatively a wealthy electorate, and many people think, is this a problem in our community? It is a problem in our community. I've spoken to the commander of the police in our community who says that 50% of the time of the police in our area is spent on domestic violence. It is everywhere in every part of this country. I also want to then acknowledge the work that some incredible people have done, particularly activists like Grace Tame and Chanel Contos, who is also from my electorate. They have done so much to share their stories and shine a light on a shameful part of our culture and how prevalent these issues are in our community, particularly amongst younger women. Like so many people in Wentworth, I have read their stories and the stories of others they have shared, and it has broken my heart. It is simply overwhelming. But I deeply admire what they have achieved, and they have put a spotlight on something we have ignored for far too long, and they've driven real change. Grace Tame bravely led the way in changing the laws in Tasmania so that survivors could speak out. Chanel Contos led the way in changing the laws in New South Wales to require affirmative consent and to embed consent education in schools. And both are continuing to drive vital changes in our laws. But it's not just changes in our laws we need. We need changes in our culture, our attitudes, our behaviours, our values, and the power imbalance between men and women in this country. We can start with the little things, such as the language in our classrooms, our locker rooms, and especially in our parliament. It's small, but it matters. It matters because small things lead to big things. Children learn from what they see and hear. If they see disrespectful attitudes, they will think that's what is acceptable, and that is how they will behave. We also need to improve the education of our children so they understand respect and consent from an early age. We teach young girls to support each other, to be careful, to defend themselves, but because they have no choice. But let's make sure we're teaching the young boys the attitudes and behaviours that will make them respectful, responsible members of the community. With strong, positive role models, I believe this is possible. Everyone should see themselves as role models for young people in their lives. Men who are caregivers, teachers, coaches, and others in similar roles have a special responsibility to teach boys how to handle their emotions in a mature, constructive way. This won't solve violence against women today, but it is a really important step. It is also absolutely critical that we acknowledge the impact of the economic imbalance between men and women and the impact that that has in terms of violence against women. We must empower women economically, because that is about empowering women in terms of power, and that makes a difference in terms of violence against women. I acknowledge the government for their work on increasing parental leave, and I strongly advocate that we make sure that this ensures that men take up a significant care role within their families, because that is absolutely critical for men to play that role, but also for women to be and continue to be economically empowered. It is absolutely critical. There is so much more that we need to do. And the work of Grace Tame and Chanel Contos and many others show us that change is possible and change can be achieved. So much has changed in the last 5 years because of strong female leadership from across the community, particularly women of all ages who are standing up. And wonderful services like the Bondi Cottage, which provides services that are so critical, the grassroots services for those in need. And I'm sure much more will change in the next 5 years. It has to. Thank you.
Are there any statements? And I call the member for Richmond.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I too would like to start by recognising all the victim survivors. I'd also like to acknowledge all of the other speakers as well from across all the different parties, and all of them speaking to rise on this very important issue on the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And, Deputy Speaker, the Albanese government, indeed I know all members of this House as well, this entire parliament, is absolutely committed to women's safety, and the fact is that women's safety is a national priority. And this is a commitment I know we all share. We're all committed to ending violence against women and children in one generation. We know that one woman dies every 10 days at the hands of a current or former partner. And we know that each week police across the country deal with 5,000 incidents of domestic violence. And this is something that I know as a former frontline police officer, having attended hundreds of domestic violence incidents and seen firsthand the tragedy and horror that it brings. So ending violence against women and children is everybody's responsibility, and it is indeed everybody's business. And last Friday, of course, was the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and commenced the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. And these 16 days really are a time for the world to unite and raise awareness and call for the prevention and elimination of gender-based violence. We must all be speaking out in this parliament, in our community, family, friends, everyone that we know talking about this issue. And, Deputy Speaker, as the Assistant Minister for the Prevention of Family Violence, I'm proud that we, as a government, as a parliament and as a nation, are taking action towards ending violence today and every day. In line with this year's theme for the 16 days of activism, Unite Activism to End Violence Against Women and Girls, I implore everyone to unite and collaborate to make that change. Together we can all work to achieve that end. And, Deputy Speaker, it is very important for anyone listening or reading this later on, if you or someone you know is impacted by domestic, family or sexual violence, to call 1800-RESPECT, which is 1-800-737-732, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And, of course, if it's a life-threatening situation, to call 000. But reach out, particularly get some support. Now, as I said, Deputy Speaker, for our government, women's safety is an absolute national priority, and recently we launched the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children. And the plan, the 10-year plan, outlined our shared vision to end gender-based violence within one generation. And the plan is a strong commitment to 10 years of sustained action, effort and partnership across governments and the sector, working towards eliminating all forms of gender-based violence.
And of course, we work very closely with all of the states and territories as well. Everyone is on the same page. And this plan, this 10-year plan, is underpinned by 4 very important pillars: prevention, early intervention, response and recovery and healing. And of course, what that means in practice is we need to stop the violence before it starts. We need to work with those people most at risk of experiencing violence, and also with those who may be prone to using violence. And we must provide support, most importantly, for the victim survivors in the short term and the long term. And the National Plan recognises that trauma-informed and person-centred approaches are needed to address a lot of the barriers to recovery and healing, and to minimise the possibility that victim survivors will be re-traumatised and harmed when using services and systems. They need to be getting the correct support when they do need it. The National Plan also provides clear indicators to track our success, to support and help in reducing the prevalence of violence. Now, Deputy Speaker, to support the implementation of the plan, we made the vitally important step of appointing the very first Domestic Family and Sexual Violence Commissioner, Michaela Cronin, who has an extensive history in the community sector and is very widely respected. And Michaela Cronin has just started in that role. And the commission that Michaela Cronin will lead will provide a formal mechanism for consultation with victim survivors and work to create a supported and structured approach to engagement at a national level. And it's these voices, the victim survivor voices, will help to inform priorities for policy, research and data collection. Because the fact is, victim survivors have to be at the absolute heart of the solutions. We know that effective solutions can only be achieved and developed with the people that are most impacted by them. The Commission will also promote coordination across the state and territory jurisdictions in the sector more broadly to highlight service gaps, areas of greatest need, and to enable a system that works together to provide that holistic support. And this really importantly includes the development of consistent definitions for improved reporting, data collection and evaluation frameworks. And through all of this, the Commissioner will be able to monitor and measure the progress of the National Plan. And of course, Deputy Speaker, as well, the Albanese government's recent budget committed $1.7 billion in funding for initiatives to support the implementation of the National Plan. And really importantly, we're delivering on our election commitment of just over $169 million over 4 years for 500 new frontline workers, community sector workers. And these workers will provide support to those experiencing family, domestic and sexual violence right across the country. And these new workers will particularly meet service gaps, especially in our rural and regional areas. We know how important it is that often people in regional areas are very isolated, so we want to make sure that support is there for them. Now, this $1.7 billion package also works to address the structural issues that contribute in relation to violence against women, including some of the things we need to address: housing, women's economic security, access to childcare, paid family and domestic violence leave, and of course respectful relationships and consent education in school. All of these are vitally important. And in addition to our 500 worker commitment, as I said, that we made during the election and are delivering on, the Women's Safety Budget Package gives $100 million for crisis and transitional housing options, because we need to have more options for women and children who are experiencing domestic violence, and also for older women as well who are at risk of homelessness. We need to have that crisis accommodation in place. And also we have additional funding for the Escaping Violence Payment Program as well. And as part of all of that package as well, some of the key priorities that we are addressing is a commitment to an investment in consent and respectful relationships education. We need to have that in our schools, so at a young age people are becoming aware about this issue and about the need for respectful relationships. And of course our commitment of over $42 million to address sexual harassment at work by implementing, very importantly, implementing the recommendations of the Respect at Work report. And of course a commitment to support the implementation of our landmark paid family and domestic violence leave. So important. These 10 days will ensure that no individual should have to choose between having a job and leaving an abusive relationship. And we're very proud to be delivering on that as part of our absolute commitment to women's safety. And Deputy Speaker, as I've said and many speakers have said, ending violence against women and children, it's everybody's responsibility, and it is indeed everybody's business. And in line with the theme for the 16 days of activism, I implore everyone to keep talking about these issues, to keep raising them. For those that we know that are victims, encourage them to get support. We have to all work together to this end. And we have this strong commitment to eliminate violence against women and children in one generation. And I know that everyone, as I say, from all sides of this parliament shares that commitment in working towards that goal. And we have to achieve it when we look at those statistics, when we look at one woman dying every 10 days at the hands of a current or former partner, when we look at police attending the 5,000 incidents per week. We have to have this change, and we have all of these measures in place since we have been elected. This is a national priority for the Albanese Labor government, and I know that our commitment is shared by everyone throughout this House.
Are there any statements? I call the member for Cowper.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Speaker, and I acknowledge the contribution from the member for Richmond and acknowledge her service in the police force previously. I'd like to start by commending the work that has been achieved to date by both the Minister for Social Services and the Shadow Minister for Child Protection and Prevention of Family Violence. Thank you for your continued commitment and for the heartfelt statements that have been made by each of you in this place to date. Hearing the similar goals and policies and planning benchmarks provided by each as we work towards eradicating this scourge from Australian society concisely reaffirms the bipartisan approach that is already in place and must continue to drive meaningful change. We, as a collective government, must be decisive, evaluative, reflective and realistic in our goals and appreciate that truly moving forward requires generational change. As we plan the next year, 3 years, 10 years, we must judge each step against a longer-term commitment. I appreciate that the current government has the same noble intentions as the one that preceded it and a strong desire to move the dial further. A simple fact that I know we all appreciate is we cannot buy our way out of this endemic. Every dollar we spend in aid of this cause needs to drive societal change and a systematic evolution of how we as a community deal not just with violence against women, but all family and domestic violence. Since accepting the role of Shadow Assistant Minister for the Prevention of Family Violence, I have met with dozens of organisations, not only from within my electorate, but also broadly across Australia, who currently provide services and support for victims of family and domestic violence, and in some cases with perpetrators. I've listened to and consulted with these organisations who span the pillars of the recent plan, from prevention to early intervention, response and recovery. Whilst I have significant first-hand experience from my years as a police officer and then a prosecutor, there are many challenges and nuances faced by each organisation at each stage of the family violence journey that I now better appreciate. I believe that one particularly vivid analogy that I was presented with earlier on, and that subsequent resonated with many of these providers, was the feeling of being the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. As an example, the New South Wales Police attended over 140,000 domestic violent incidents each year for the past 3 years. This equates to one call to the police every 4 minutes in my home state. In one particular township within my electorate, I've heard from the providers that domestic violence response contributes up to 50% of their workload. In regional and rural areas as a whole, incidents of domestic violence and subsequent court orders are significantly higher than their metro counterparts per capita. To illustrate this, in 2021 there were over 2,300 domestic violence orders granted on the Mid-North Coast and Coffs Harbour areas, a rate more than double that of Greater Sydney. When looking at statistics such as this, I'm saddened and equally disgusted. I am also determined to ensure that as parliamentarians we are paying enough attention to prevention and early intervention. I absolutely recognise the very real and immediate need to provide response and recovery services, to invest in appropriate housing and support measures for those already in the cycle. I have personally worked with local and state governments in my first term to provide a great example of this in Kempsey, where the old ambulance station that was no longer in use is now being repurposed into 26 apartments to be used for crisis accommodation, along with 24-hour on-site support and youth facilities. It's overdue and critical infrastructure that I am extremely proud to have played a part in. But I recognise that a lot of funding is back-end loaded, and without adequate resourcing and effective programs for prevention and early intervention, we will perpetually be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, spending infinite time and resources on response rather than providing a pathway or guide rails for respectful relationships and attitudes towards women. Acting Deputy Speaker, I have stated this before and continue to say that I am committed to working with any individual, organisation or party who dedicates themselves to ending violence against women, children and family. We owe it to our communities and we owe it to our future generations. This generational change must start with the saturation of education. Education at schools, education at home, education at work, in sporting clubs, businesses and industry. Not just for 6 months, not for a year, but year after year until the message is heard and listened to, and the language and the action of respect are the norm rather than the exception. And I look forward to working with my colleagues across the floor.
Are there any statements? I call the member for McNamara.
Thank you, Acting Speaker. I rise to speak on this important recognition on the International Day for the Elimination of Violence against Women. As those who have spoken before me have expressed, domestic and family violence is a national crisis and a national shame. 1 in 4 women have experienced family violence and 1 in 5 women have experienced sexual violence since the age of 15. Australian police deal with a domestic violence matter every 2 minutes, with an estimated 657 domestic violence matters on average every single day of the year. These are shocking statistics, but they are not just numbers. These women are our mothers, grandmothers, sisters, daughters, friends, neighbours, colleagues. And they all had the right to be safe, to live free from violence and fear. I recently came across a comment from the CEO of Respect Victoria, Emily Maguire. This is what Emily said. Violence against women is preventable, and it's a challenge that belongs to all of us. It's critical that men are part of the journey and that they support each other to break down outdated stereotypes about gender, masculinity, and what it means to be a man. Well, I would like to do my part, to end men's violence towards women and children, as a political leader and as a man, and that's why I'm taking up Emily's call to action. To date, our public conversation around violence, perhaps understandably, has focused on a crisis response. And the onus has been on the victim survivor to leave the violent relationship. And in response to this public conversation, we often hear the words, "not all men." Well, I've never met a domestic violence frontline worker or victim survivor who has claimed that all men are bad and perpetrate violence. That is not what they are advocating for. But all men do have a responsibility to help change the culture that allows this gendered violence to occur. As Tarang Chawla, an advocate whose sister was murdered at the hands of her partner, said, "If we have a room of 10 men and one of them is a potential killer and the other 9 men are silent, they might as well not be there. We must address this gender inequity together. We must end a culture where women are mistreated and discriminated against based on their gender. I feel this and I am committed to this, not just because I am the father of a daughter, but because, quite frankly, it's just the right thing to do. Almost a decade ago, under a Labor government, the prevention body Our Watch was created. This is the proud legacy of some amazing women, including Julia Gillard, Jenny Macklin, Julie Collins, Kate Ellis and Tanya Plibersek. I recommend you to visit Our Watch to find resources for how you can help change the culture and prevent men's violence against women. Because we all have a responsibility to educate ourselves, to call out poor behaviour, to reflect on our own actions and to listen to the women around us. I would like to conclude by saying that if you or someone know is experiencing violence, you can call 1800-RESPECT. For counselling, advice and support for men who have anger, relationship or parenting issues, you can call the Men's Referral Service on 1300 766 491. We have set a goal to eliminate violence against women over a generation. That is an ambition I share. And as a man, I pledge to support the strength, the courage and the work of Australian women seeking to achieve this important goal. It's time to end this national shame.
Are there any statements? I call the member for Boothby.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Last Friday, the 25th of November, marked International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and the beginning of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. I would like to thank Minister Rishworth and Assistant Minister Elliott for marking that occasion with statements in the House and commend them on their ongoing work towards eliminating violence against women. In Australia, one woman dies every 10 years at the hands of her former or current partner. 1 in 2 women will experience sexual harassment in their lifetime. That's 50% of all adult women you know has experienced, may currently be experiencing or will experience sexual harassment. And every 2 minutes in this country, police deal with a domestic or family violence matter, and let's call them what they are, assaults. And while it is true to say that violence against women happens across every country in Australia, across every demographic and every postcode, we know that some women are more likely to experience violence. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women are 11 times more likely to be killed due to family violence than non-Indigenous women. And women with disability are more than twice as likely to experience domestic or family violence than those without disability. Compounding social disadvantages also play a role in increasing a woman's risk at experiencing violence. But let's be clear, there are no excuses, there are no reasons. Violence is never acceptable. Last month, the Minister for Social Services, Amanda Rishworth, released the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children 2022-32. Importantly, this government, along with all states and territories, has committed to a shared goal of ending gendered violence within a generation. This is a very ambitious goal, there's no denying it, but it's critical. Women and children have a right to feel safe in our community, and that's why we're investing a record $1.7 billion towards that goal. Our national plan involves actions that can be structured into 4 broad domains. Prevention. We will work to change the underlying social drivers of violence by addressing not only the attitudes but also the systems that give rise to violence against women and children, to stop it before it starts. Early intervention. We will focus on our efforts on identifying and supporting individuals who are at high risk of experiencing or perpetrating violence. And to be clear, we do need to work with perpetrators and those at risk. Response. We will continue to build on and improve services and supports to support victim survivors experiencing violence, such as crisis support and police intervention, and a trauma-informed justice system. And recovery and healing. The plan has a focus on reducing the risk of re-traumatisation and supporting victim survivors to be healthy and safe and to recover from trauma, and not just the physical but also the mental, emotional and economic impacts of violence. The National Plan also works in collaboration with our implementation of the recommendations of the Respect at Work report, which passed Parliament last week, because women should be safe in the workplace as well. And of course the 10 days paid domestic violence leave, because a woman shouldn't have to choose between a job and her safety. Deputy Speaker, Boothby is filled with wonderful women's organisations, and these groups often do unrecognised work providing safe places, resources and other supports and awareness raising for women in our community. And I particularly want to acknowledge the Zonta Club of the Adelaide Hills. Zonta are participating in the 16 Days of Activism campaign, which calls for action against one of the world's most persistent and insidious human rights violations, violence against women. Zonta Adelaide Hills are holding displays in community settings which highlight the importance of stopping violence. They are providing local businesses and offices, including my own electorate office in Glenelg, with posters, and ours is proudly displayed in our office in Boothby. Deputy Speaker, I spent my last 3 years of high school education at an all-girls school, and it's the sort of school that does high school reunions. The 10-year reunion was about careers and marriages, and how lucky and happy we all were. The 20-year reunion was about children, everyone a gifted student. The 30-year reunion, sadly, was about divorce. And then the true stories came out. The woman whose first marriage lasted 3 months because her new husband broke her leg. The woman who endured a 25-year marriage of financial and social control, threats and violence, followed by a couple of years of abuse via the legal system. The woman whose ex-husband kept driving past her house years after their separation, knowing that that was enough to terrify her after decades of conditioning, just knowing he was somewhere nearby. And the woman who was too frightened to leave, knowing her husband had the financial wherewithal and contacts to take the children and leave her destitute. Secrets that had been kept for years, women and children living in fear and misery. Women think it was only them having this sort of experience, or conditioned to think that it was because of them, that it was their fault. Terrified to leave because they knew that would anger him. Terrified to stay because it was only getting worse. Sometimes family didn't even know. Sometimes they did know, but they didn't support the woman to leave. Working in the homelessness system and in women's health and safety services, I saw women from all walks of life. Domestic and family violence was very often a part of how they had become homeless, and sometimes it was years after the actual experience of violence. Because the trauma that comes from experiencing violence stays with you. The trauma that comes with being psychologically manipulated, being belittled and undermined, being isolated from family and friends, being financially manipulated, has lifelong impacts. Homelessness, joblessness, poverty, loss of family are just some of those impacts. No one deserves violence. No one should expect it or have to live with it. This must end. Deputy Speaker, there is no place in our society for violence against women, and that's why I'm proud to stand here today to recognise, on behalf of the people of Boothby, the government's support for the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Thank you.
It being near enough to 6:30 p.m, the debate is interrupted in accordance with Standing Order 192B. The debate is adjourned and the resumption of the debate will be made in order of the day for the next sitting. I call the clerk.
The government business order of the day, number 1, grievance debate.
The question is that grievances be noted, and I call the member for Kennedy.
Speaker, I represent 4 of the 6 biggest rivers in Australia. The Mitchell River is bigger than the Murray-Darling. Is one of those rivers, and the Murray-Darling feeds 60 million people. Therefore, these 4 rivers could feed some 600 million people. 2 billion people go to bed hungry every night, and we celebrate the birth of our Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ in a few weeks' time. And he came down here and he told us that we have a responsibility to our fellow man. We have a responsibility to other people. And he made it pretty specific that other people didn't mean the bloke next door, but it meant maybe the bloke over the other side of the planet, possibly. So the immorality, apart from any other consideration, just the immorality of that. Now, for those that love nature and have a great interest in it, such as people like myself, my wife, not me, but has planted over 1,000 native trees on a block of 10 acres that had 2 giant gullies, 400 Chinese bush and rubber vine, they're terrible introduced species, and a little bit of wiregrass, grew about that high. A barren, degrading block of land. Now it has over 1,000 trees. It has buffalo grass and eucalyptus so dense you can hardly walk through it. 3 or 4 kangaroos have taken up residence. About 23 birds come and go. You can see them from the back porch. We have a responsibility to make nature and the planet better, Mr. Speaker. It is not good enough for us just to stand aside. And, you know, the greenie element, it always amazes me. They somehow think that if you leave it alone, it'll all be wonderful. That's not how the world works, I'm sorry. Birds fly in from Asia. They bring seeds with them. They drop the seeds. The natural erosive cycle in northern Australia is we have 3 months, 3 or 4 months, what we call the wet season, and the sky falls on us for 4 or 5 weeks of those 3 months. And we don't have rivers. We have a floodplain, and then we have nothing. We have an empty riverbed, an empty floodplain. But when that massive flood occurs, as it does every year, the wet, normally driven by a cyclonic depression, rips and tears and rushes on its journey to the sea, taking massive amounts of topsoil with it. In other words, we have a natural cycle of erosion. And, you know, God has gifted us this wonderful, wonderful, beautiful place. And he would hold us responsible, as does the rest of the world, even if you don't believe in God or hereafters or anything. Surely you feel that you have a responsibility to the planet. So all that we say, as the great Ernie Bridge, the first Australian to become a cabinet minister in Australian history, with his wonderful bridging scheme, similar to the Bradfield scheme on the East Coast states, over there. It's the bridging scheme, taking waters from where we have this massive rainfall in northern Australia and taking a little bit of that water. But to quote Ernie Bridge, he had a wonderful quote. He said, all we are saying is that our giant rivers, on their rush and roaring and ripping to the sea, paid a small tribute to those people that live along their banks. And I might add, a small tribute to improving our nature wonderland. And that requires dams and weirs. And if you go to Cubby Station, and I'm most certainly not a fan of Cubby Station, I can assure you, but if you go there, they get 10,000 hectares of water, and there's kangaroos everywhere and bird life. I mean, if you put water in a barren wilderness, you create a wonderland of nature. And I must comment as I go past on this, that we now are having very angry, increasingly angry confrontations with developers, sharks and spivs that are up there selling windmills. Well, windmills are a wonderful thing at a place like Hughenden with fantastic wind and no nature to disrupt. But you do not put a chain of windmills right along beside some of the last remnant jungle on Earth. And yet that is what is happening. So, you know, here's me attending greenie meetings, you know, objecting. But to quote the professor that gave the leading address at the first demonstration, if you like, against the windmills. He said, what is actually happening here is that our beautiful nature wonderland is being turned into an industrial wasteland. And that's a good call. But Mr. Speaker, Mr. Acting Speaker, look, with a few $1,000 million, we can give you something like $30 billion a year in revenue. And that's not a figure plucked out of the air. 60% of Australia's agriculture comes from one river, just from one river, the Murray-Darling River. One river, 60 billion a year. Well, I've got, 6 times that amount of water in just 4 rivers in the Kennedy electorate. And there's not a single farm anywhere in sight. Yes, there is. There's 5 farms. 5 farms producing about $2 million a year, I suppose, maybe $3 million a year. The rivers are fenced off. The stock are not allowed near them because they're alive with crocodiles. Says they're not even used for that purpose. And if animals go there because of what we humans have done, there is now a proliferation of crocodiles. They weren't there before, they are there now. And that is the fault of humans. Just one example, Mr. Speaker, because we're talking about nature here. You start fooling around with nature, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble. Now, the dingoes, the goannas, and most of all, the human beings hit the crocodile eggs. And I have seen first Australians raid the crocodile egg nest. Now, you removed, we human beings came in, oh, we know everything about everything. Oh, we're going to protect the crocodiles. Well, we did. Now, what has happened is you've knocked nature completely out of balance. You removed the 3 natural predators, and the crocodile numbers are now exploding. All the natural predators were removed by we foolish humans interfering. So you don't want to interfere. Let me return to the possibilities. Where there is barrenness, erosion, 20 million hectares of invasive prickly acacia trees. 20 million hectares! A beautiful natural wonderland has been destroyed by just one invasive species, Mr. Speaker, just one. So we can replace that with a beautiful nature wonderland, and that's what we're asking for here, and a great wealth for our people, and the feeding of a couple of billion people on the planet that go to bed hungry every night.
I thank the member. The question is that grievances be noted, and I call the member for, to get this right, Cunningham.
Cunningham, thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise tonight to talk about some of the fantastic local organisations from my electorate and the work that they do to support our community. The Multicultural Communities Council of Illawarra, known to most of us in the Illawarra as the MCCI, is a non-profit charity that supports people from diverse backgrounds in the Illawarra, Shoalhaven and as well as the ACT and surrounding regions. With nearly 200 staff and volunteers speaking over 40 languages, the MCCI delivers a range of services including aged care services, youth development programs, stakeholder engagement as well as community volunteering and training services. Popular services include weekly multicultural social football, a beach water safety and awareness program and a weekly women-led cooking circle, thank you. SCARF, a local organisation who recently merged with the MCCI, offers programs to help refugees start a new life in Australia by navigating the practical and personal challenges of settlement while building a sense of belonging. SCARF utilises friendship-based support with their programs delivered by more than 150 local volunteers who create a special dynamic of help that is offered between friends and neighbours rather than between a caseworker and a client. It delivers tailored training workshops to help build understanding of the refugee experience and equip participants with a broad range of cultural skills. One of the popular programs provided is a mentor driving program, which addresses barriers such as not having access to a car, a licensed driver, or important information about licensing and road rules. Earlier this month, I had the pleasure of attending the Accelerate Her networking event at the Wollongong Youth Centre as a mentor. Accelerate Her is a little bit like career speed dating. Young women from called backgrounds meet with mentors from various different backgrounds and industries. While I was there, I met two amazing women, Justine and Grace. Accelerate Her supports young women from multicultural, refugee or similar backgrounds in realising their aspirations by connecting them with industry professionals. The program enables the development of networks and pathways into their chosen professions and helps empower their future ambitions. Lead the Way is a new youth leadership initiative in the Illawarra region that will help to develop the next generation of social cohesion community champions. Lead the Way seeks to inspire and empower young women to exercise practical leadership, take action for themselves, their families and their communities. Lead the Way is a collaboration between the Illawarra Women's Health Centre, the University of Wollongong, the Duke of Edinburgh program and the MCCI. The program combines elements from leadership and personal development and wellbeing initiatives to help young women from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds build social cohesion, community resilience, youth wellbeing and also strengthen their identities. Lead the Way supports young women to make successful life transitions, pursue their dreams, form new support networks and be active members of the community. The program follows a strengths-based and youth-led approach that is trauma-informed and culturally sensitive. With help from the community, it promotes personal development, furthers participants' education and skills, improves physical and emotional wellbeing and creates community engagement activities. To do this, the program is designed to build on the inherent strengths of the participants, their identities and their life experiences as migrants and former refugees. By using structured activities, they prepare young people to have the confidence and practical skills they need to exercise leadership and agency. The program also helps build community connections and create strategies to help prevent the emergence of racism and violence and to help young people respond to these threats when it's needed. Justine was one of the wonderful women I met during the program. She moved to Australia from the Philippines at just 8 years old and now considers Australia her second home. She said that she was raised in an environment that only had enough, but my childhood was a happy one. It was this environment that shaped who I am today, and I am proud to be able to call myself a Filipino. She told me that after hearing about all the new and interesting places we will be able to go, I became very eager and excited to join the Lead the Way program. The women running the program are very friendly and welcoming. The program makes it possible for her to talk to people who really understand and support her. Having their own real-life experiences, we can relate with each other's struggles. I am excited to work towards my Duke of Edinburgh award, which will help me in my future careers and teach me independence and consistency. She went on to tell me that the program makes it possible for her to talk to people who both understand and support her because of their similar shared life experiences and struggles. She explained to me that, quote, the Lead the Way program has taught me many team building and leadership skills and has pushed me beyond my comfort zone. I have been able to build my confidence, meet new people who are supportive and successful, and I have been able to gain new experiences going to many different supportive communities. When she was asked how she would describe these programs to other multicultural young women, she said that it was a wonderful opportunity to connect with people who have gone through similar difficulties and experiences. The programs have made it possible to explore new activities and pathways that she would not have been able to experience otherwise. It was those environments that eliminated the fear of trying something new by building a support network and encouraging her to put herself out there. In the end, the experiences were a good way for her to make friends and just have fun. Grace is a Congolese woman who also takes part in the Lead the Way program. Grace grew up in Kenya and moved to Australia 5 years ago. Since arriving in Australia, she has been an active participant in the Lead the Way program and also attended the Accelerate Her networking event. Grace discovered the program through her school and found it to be an excellent way to interact with individuals from all cultures, bringing them together and helping them understand one another. And additionally, it was an excellent curriculum with a variety of talents to give. Grace ascribed great value to the program for helping her learn leadership and communication skills, as well as assisting her in her preparation for the Duke of Edinburgh Awards. It also provided several opportunities to engage in other activities, including volunteer work and supporting her education about various aspects of other cultures. When asked if she would also recommend the program to other young women, she said that she wants to advise them to participate in the program if they ever get the chance, because it offers a lot of chances and a variety of talents that they might not otherwise have. And additionally, it's a good day to spend with your friends doing other things outside of school while not attending class. I am in awe of the amazing work of so many people in our community, from the services provided by organisations such as MCCI and SCARF to the Accelerate Her and Lead the Way programs. There is so much on offer to help build a stronger community in our region. One of the many great strengths of my region is its long history of migration, multiculturalism and diversity. Over the years, we have seen many new migrant communities call the Illawarra home, and I love being able to represent a diverse electorate that is teeming with such rich cultural history. My mum immigrated to the Illawarra herself after leaving Holland when she was in primary school, without any English language skills. She would go on to meet my dad and start a family in Woonona. But I am so proud that organisations such as the MCCI and SCARF are at the forefront of ensuring that all of those who choose to call Australia home are welcomed and supported. Every day you can see the impact that these services have on our community and bringing us all together. I know the values these organisations hold around equal opportunity and inclusivity are not just at core of my beliefs and those of my community, but this new Labor government, setting the standard for how Australians should treat each other and how we should welcome new communities must start from the top. And it is so great to have a government that leads with respect back on our side of the chamber. I know that I have barely scratched the surface of the incredible number of programs available in my community. Thank you to everyone who supports our community, and thank you for making me so proud to call the Illawarra home. I would also like to thank Francesca Lambert, a work experience student from the Australian National University, who spent last week helping out in my parliamentary office and helped put this speech together. It is fantastic to see more young women taking such an interest in politics, and it was an absolute delight to have her as part of our team. Another quick mention tonight goes to Louis Parnis and Elizabeth at the George Cross Falcons Club at Cringilla in the member for Whitlam's electorate. The state member for Wollongong, Paul Scully, and I attended the club on Saturday night, where we saw an amazing show by Elvis impersonator Paul Fennick. This show provided so much joy to the Maltese community in the Illawarra. The electricity in the air was palpable. They all had a fabulous time at this event. And I just wanted to thank Louis and Elizabeth and their team of volunteers who worked so hard to provide services and support for our Maltese community. I thank them so much for their time and effort.
I thank the member. The question is that the grievance has been noted, and I call the member for Petrie.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Look, today I rise to add my feelings of disgrace and disappointment at the decimation of koala habitat at Ray Frawley Fields, Elizabeth Avenue at Clontarf. The eucalypt trees were cleared for the pedestrian overpass across Elizabeth Avenue, and since the Queensland Government has cleared these trees, we've already had one koala die and another one displaced. Now, on Wednesday the 30th of March, some 8 months ago, I attended a meeting with the state member for Redcliffe and Queensland Transport and Main Roads representatives and residents Phil and Susan Johnson, also local environmentalists, and a representative from the Clontarf State High. Now, during that meeting on the 30th of March, I asked Transport and Main Roads for one other road safety project where state and federal funding could be spent. Just one. So road safety is very important. You would think that the Queensland Government, in the seat the size of mine, 3 times the size of a state seat, or anywhere even in Moreton Bay, would have a road safety project other than this pedestrian overpass, which the community doesn't want. You know what the answer was? No. Nothing. Not one other road safety project in 18 months that could be done. This shows that the Transport and Main Roads Minister, Mark Bailey, has no ability to forward plan, which we have seen also in Griffin, with 100 homes or so being resumed there to make way for Bruce Highway upgrades that were also not planned. The story there, of course, is homeowners in Griffin, and you'd know well, Mr Deputy Speaker, in your own electorate in Narangba as well, where people were building brand new homes. The day they got the keys, they were getting a resumption notice. So the Minister, Mark Bailey, has clearly failed there. He's clearly failed with saving these eucalypt trees in Clontarf as well. During that meeting as well, the State MP Yvette D'Arth and myself and local residents went down to Ray Frawley Fields. We left where we were originally meeting and we went at the old fire station on Oxley Avenue, and we went down to Ray Frawley Fields, looked at where the overpass would go, and we worked out that if this project must go ahead because they had nothing else, that at least half of the eucalypt trees could be saved. Now, that was a commitment by the state MP. But what's happened is a lot have been bulldozed. There's one left in the middle, just sticking out. Everything else is gone. Now, clearly, the state MP took this information on board, Yvette D'Arth, and she said it could be done. The TMR representatives, the Transport and Main Road representatives, said it can be done. So you can imagine my surprise when I returned home from our sitting week last week to find that all the trees at Ray Frawley Fields have pretty well been knocked down and have been removed. And the reality is that this overpass does not have the support of the community, who were concerned about koala habitat and tree removal. There's a couple of Facebook pages set up, Stop Clontarf Overpass Action Group and Pristine Peninsula as well. Now, Sue Johnson, this is what she said: "We feel deceived. I'm angry that despite being declared endangered, the law is not protecting our koalas from having their homes and breeding corridors destroyed. And in this particular case, for the sake of a pedestrian overpass for which funding was rushed through without any supporting data and ignoring community requests for alternative safety upgrades." And at the time I said to the state MP and TMR representatives, why not build it at Hercules Road? There's been a lot of people contact me about that school, but they said they couldn't do that and not one other road safety project. So it goes ahead. The trees are supposed to be preserved. They're all knocked down as well. There's been a failure by the state government here, by the minister, but also the state MP. Les Barkler, another resident, has sent me questions for the state government, which I did forward to the state opposition. But it says Department of Transport and Main Road officers advised the state and federal MPs and the communities at a site at that meeting that some trees would be retained. Exactly, Les. And they also stated in a letter on the 13th of June 2022, Des, to a local resident, that the position of the overpass has been selected to retain as many of the local street trees as possible. Well, guess what? The lot got knocked down. Les says that DTMR plan graphics show trees on site post-completion. That's in the drawings. And his question to Minister Scanlon in the Palaszczuk government was, why were these trees removed and why wasn't there temporary fauna exclusion fencing installed to protect local endangered koalas? Now, I'll write to them, Les, but it really is a failure of the state Labor MP Yvette D'Arth to do her job properly. I'm sorry. There's no other way to describe it. Her electorate's a third of the size of ours, being federal MPs. It's a simple thing. If you say you're going to save a few trees, save a few trees. Don't have your state department bulldoze a lot. We had the death of a koala squashed on the road the day after they were bulldozed and another one displaced. So I can understand why residents are upset. Deputy Speaker, I would like to bring to your attention the current issues around active native title applications that cover the Moreton Bay region in our area and Noosa and Sunshine Coast. The area that I represent in the Moreton Bay region is on Gubby Gubby land. And since the Native Title Act was passed in 1993, there have been 14 native title applications submitted within the Moreton Bay Regional Council area. The most recent application was filed in 2018. Queensland South Native Title Services, known as QSNTS, is a government-funded organisation that is providing legal representation to native title applicants. The current claim that QSNTS are representing on Gubbi Gubbi country has many flaws. This has been pointed out to me by Gubbi Gubbi Junangu, a group that you would be familiar with, Deputy Speaker, as a member for Longman, who are a Gubbi Gubbi traditional owners and a not-for-profit organisation that do a great job teaching Aboriginal language and Indigenous language in schools. They have been active members of our community for many years, and their members have brought this concern around native title claims to my attention. The current claim before the federal court in Moreton Bay has 7 applicants. It is unknown how these 7 people were selected from a large group of descendants. Members of Gubbi Gubbi Junangu group have told me that they don't represent all traditional owners of the area, but notes that the 7 applicants for the latest native title claim were not chosen through a formal election process, which is usually standard practice. QSNTS appear to be cutting corners to increase their chances of increasing their quota of native title claims that get passed in the federal court. Members of Gubbi Gubbi Junangu group have said the 7 applicants represent only themselves and their children. They do not represent all the traditional owners in the area and therefore should not be making decisions on behalf of others. They seem to care more about making money than upholding the original purpose of native title, which is hunting, fishing and camping on country. 3 of the applicants are known to live in Cherbourg, which is on Waka Waka country, so they're trying to make decisions for country they don't live on. Another tactic to generate money from native title claims is to obtain compensation payments of small pockets of freehold unallocated state-owned land. And for anyone who inquires to the Queensland Government or Council to purchase freehold land, they are referred to contact the registered native title applicants to negotiate a price for the sale because the land is subject to a native title claim. The sale price is essentially compensation money that will go to the native title applicants post-sale if they surrender their native title rights to the area of land. It is ironic, Deputy Speaker, that when there is money involved, all of a sudden these native title applicants come out of the woodwork and claim compensation over the smallest pockets of land. According to Gubbi Gubbi Junangu, this is nothing more than a cash grab by some in the Indigenous community under the guise of native title and land rights. For example, this scenario is happening in Scarborough, in the Redcliffe Peninsula, for 3 lots of land. Each are only 143 square metres in total. So the way it works is that you can have freehold land and you want to buy it from the council or the state government, a very small piece, just a couple of square metres, and they go, no, go and talk to these people because there's a native title claim over it. And they say, oh yeah, that'll be 50 grand, tens of thousands of dollars for a small lot of land. And this is unacceptable. The Moreton Bay region is a major urban landscape with high density of houses, commercial buildings and roads, and that is the reality of the current state of the area, and native title activities to fish, hunt and camp on Gubbi Gubbi country are limited to urbanisation. Therefore, native title in this area is just plain exploitation, according to Gubbi Gubbi Junangu, and I am calling for a parliamentary inquiry into the native title system. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
I thank the member. The question is that grievances be noted, and I call the member for Macon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and in the time I have I will refer to 2 matters. In April this year, Parliament passed the Mitochondrial Donation Law Reform Act 2022, otherwise referred to as Mave's Law. The passage of that legislation gave hope to families faced with debilitating and even life-threatening disease through the advancement of mitochondrial donation. That hope drew on similar legislation passed in the UK in 2015, which allowed for the study and testing of mitochondrial donation under strictly regulated conditions. Similar research was proposed here in Australia, where we have some outstanding medical research centres. In speaking to the legislation during the parliamentary debate, I referred to concerns that had been raised by the Robinson Research Centre in Adelaide about the procedure. I also noted that since 2015, the UK research had provided no update on the effectiveness of mitochondrial donation. Last month, the Australian Medical Research, or 3 Australian medical researchers, Paul Komasaroff, Ian Kerridge and Robert Norman, had a paper on mitochondrial donation published in the Internal Medical Journal number 52, explaining the possible risks and highlighting the need for more research. Now, I'll quote just a couple of paragraphs from their paper. And I'll quote, "It is universally recognised that the stakes are very high. If the technology were to turn out to be unsafe, profoundly harmful consequences could result, such as the transmission of the very conditions that were sought to be averted, the creation of new, previously unknown diseases, and the introduction of novel forms of mitochondrial dysfunction with effects impossible to predict. Moreover, such adverse outcomes would not only affect the individual children produced, but would likely also be transmitted to succeeding generations. Obviously, under such circumstances, the implications for this entire field of research could be disastrous." Madam Deputy Speaker, based on those comments, and I haven't read the full article in the Internal Medical Journal, it is clear that much more research is required, and I draw this matter to the attention of the Health Minister so that Parliament can in fact deliver on the hope that Maves Law provided to those families looking for a breakthrough in responding to mitochondrial disease by funding the research that is needed. Without that research, we cannot put Maves Law into effect, and we cannot provide that light at the end of the tunnel for all of those families that were so much hoping that this would be a path forward for them. Madam Deputy Speaker, the other matter that I will refer to is that today is the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. November the 29th has been marked as such a day for a long time. It was first established by a UN resolution in 1977. The day draws attention to the struggles for recognition of the Palestinian people and the creation of a separate Palestinian state. Despite 139 countries now recognising the State of Palestine, after decades of negotiations and conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian issue remains unresolved. 8 million Palestinian people continue to live in Israel-occupied territory and refugee camps in neighbouring Arab states. Simultaneously, the Palestinian people face everyday struggles for survival, the loss of land, human rights violations and oppression. In a report released only in September this year by the UN Special Rapporteur named, of all names, Francesca Albanese, and the report titled "The Situation of Human Rights in the Palestinian Territories Occupied since 1967", there is clear evidence that the struggles of the Palestinian people continue. And again, I will refer to only a couple of paragraphs from that report. And paragraph 6 in particular says, and I quote, "Since 1967, the human rights situation in the occupied Palestinian territory has been steadily deteriorating, primarily as a result of gross violations of international law, including racial segregation and subjugation by the occupying power, Israel. This has taken various forms: draconian restrictions on Palestinian movement inside and outside the occupied Palestinian territory, repression of political and civic participation, denial of residency rights, status and family unification, dispossession of Palestinian land and property, forcible transfers, unlawful killings, widespread arbitrary arrests and detention, including of children, the obstruction and denial of humanitarian aid and cooperation, the denial of ownership and access to natural resources, settler violence and violent suppression of popular resistance against the occupation. Altogether, these practices constitute collective punishment of the Palestinian people." End of quote. Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said, the full report contains a lot more information with respect to the Special Rapporteur's findings, which were then presented to the UN. But the reality is that all of those matters, I believe, are well known and have been known for years and years. And the reality also is that the Palestinian people continue to struggle despite a promise or a belief in their mind some 75 years ago that they would be provided with statehood. And whilst Israel has been able to achieve that, the Palestinian people still have not. And so today, on the day that that is marked as the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, I again bring this matter to the House's attention. And I note that today in this House there was indeed a meeting of the people that had an interest in this issue, and I don't believe I have come to this House and attended what I call a briefing session with as many people as were there today at the briefing session on this very matter. And it's clear that world opinion, and even here in Australia, is shifting towards the acceptance of Palestine as a peoples that deserve to have their own statehood, and it is something that I believe should be allowed to happen sooner rather than later. Can I say, in a similar vein, the people of Kurdistan face very, very similar situations. They too do not have a state of their own. They have their lands, but their lands are surrounded, in fact, by Turkey, Iran, Syria, Iraq and Armenia. They don't have statehood as a result of not having statehood. They also do not have a voice in the UN. They do not have a voice on the world stage in so many different places. And at the same time, their people are also being subjected to all sorts of hostility from surrounding countries, incarceration rates much higher than in other places. Along with those incarceration rates, many death sentences being handed down, and the constant attack on their lands is not only resulting in them losing their lands, but is also resulting in the loss of hundreds and hundreds of lives. The Kurdish people have also come to this parliament and sought to at least have a friendship group established from within parliament so that they, through that friendship group, would have a voice to this parliament and beyond. And without that, I guess, like the Palestinian people, they are also being left out there in a position where they have real issues ahead of them. They are confronted with discrimination and oppression every single day of their life, and they have no forum and no voice through which they can raise those issues. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I say today, as we reflect on the International Day of Solidarity with Palestine, people around the world deserve to have the same opportunities that we have in Australia, and if we can assist that in that happening in any way, we should be doing that.
The question is that the grievances be noted, and I call the member for Moore.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In contributing to this grievance debate, I rise to inform the Parliament of the urgent need for federal funding to improve and expand vocational education and training opportunities in my electorate. At a time when our economy is facing a shortage of skilled labour, substantial investment is required to train our youth to become productive members of the workforce. Strong population growth is occurring in the northern coastal suburbs of Perth, so it is imperative to develop new training facilities close to residential areas. Engaging with young people and providing the right opportunities and pathways to enter technologically advanced industries will benefit the local economy. The College of Electrical Training in Joondalup is an award-winning industry training centre operated by the National Electrical and Communications Association. The college is in its early stages of planning a new innovation centre. This state-of-the-art facility will provide courses of study in the new technologies relevant to apprentices of the future, including advanced batteries, hydrogen cells, robotics and automation. The Innovation Centre will be based in the Joondalup Innovation and Learning Precinct, which is already home to the emerging cybersecurity industry in WA. It is encouraging that industry recognises the need to address acute trade shortages now, which will soon be critical as we move towards a renewable energy future. Additional federal funding is required to provide local vocational education and training facilities based in Joondalup for our residents, which will help develop the highly skilled workforce of the future. I look forward to working with the City of Joondalup and the Joondalup Business Association to secure the much-needed investment in training facilities for our regional city. I wish to acknowledge the contributions of NECA CEO Carl Copeland and Steve Hall as they and their team push the boundaries to meet the needs of their industry. They have briefed me about the proposal to develop an innovation centre to provide a pathway for high school students to enter the industry. Funding is required to assist in the construction of the centre. Whilst NECA has purchased the site, an additional $15 million is required to complete the project. The proposed innovation centre will not only provide an introduction to a career in the industry, but also allow a transition from middle school to pre-apprenticeship in school pathways. These pathways lead to electrical trades and are expected to provide employment to approximately 160 school leavers each year. With industry training spaces for the post-trade market, these are the types of projects which will bring real-world experience to the post-secondary school training environment. For many years, the study of science, technology, engineering and mathematics subjects have been highly regarded by parents as being the key to their children's future careers. Despite this, commencements in the trades have not kept up with the demands of industry. While trades have been the traditional pathway for the less academically inclined, the requisite knowledge and skills required for trades have increased. With a focus on new energy apprenticeships, the electrical and associated trades now demand a clearer path from years 7 to 12. Decisions made in middle school can impact greatly on a school leaver's readiness for STEM careers. Apprentice completion rates clearly show that ill-prepared or uninformed decisions before an apprenticeship commences will have a detrimental impact on completion. Many school graduates are exiting the school systems with minimal, if any, experience using hand tools, applied engineering or mathematics. While becoming steadily more demanding from a STEM perspective, the trade profession is still one of the early starts, physical activity and greater dangers. The school education system is not adequately providing the career pathway options available to students in STEM streams. Experience centres such as SciTech in Perth are used to ignite the mind and passion for STEM in the middle school student. The government has acknowledged the significant demand for workers as outlined in its Powering Australia proposal due to the current skills shortage. From rewiring the grid to solar banks and community batteries, every one of these initiatives require highly skilled and trained electricians. A new energy skills program to ensure training pathways were fit for purpose should lead to 10,000 new energy apprentices. The government needs to plan for the future by investing in the training facilities required to develop the highly skilled workforce required by emerging industries. For instance, the green hydrogen industry is expected to provide sustainable employment for more than 30 million people worldwide by 2050. Green hydrogen requires electrical workers across every step of the process. Add to this BESS, BEV, and PHEV battery technologies, and the demand for electrical workers will only increase. Australian Industry Standards, the skills organisation responsible for the electrotechnology package, notes that workforce size will grow by over 24,000 by 2026, and with the renewable energy sector to employ over 44,000 people by 2025. Many of these in regional Australia. This growth in the workforce starts with school leavers to to ensure that we have a sustainable future. I wish to place on the parliamentary record my strong support for $15 million in federal funding to enable the College of Electrical Training to construct the new Innovation Centre on its site in Joondalup. I have previously informed this House about the need to attract more technologically advanced industries to the city of Joondalup. These new businesses will be able to collaborate with the institutions within the Joondalup Learning Precinct and Innovation Hub, thus providing more opportunities to work locally for our highly skilled workforce. The Joondalup Innovation and Learning Precinct is already home to Edith Cowan University, the North Metropolitan College of TAFE, the College of Electrical Training, the Cyber Security Training Centre, and the Western Australian Police Academy. Investment in the new NICA College of Electrical Training and Innovation Centre will add to the world-class vocational training and education precinct by focusing on higher education opportunities already available by expanding collaboration, advocacy, and resource sharing. Deputy Speaker, I call upon the Albanese government to favourably consider the proposal by the College of Electrical Training and NICA to develop an innovation centre in Joondalup and provide the necessary $15 million in federal funding for its construction. Investing in training facilities today will develop the skilled workforce of the future, adding to the productive capacity of our economy. The youth of the northern suburbs of Perth and in my electorate of Moore will benefit significantly from access to educational opportunities close to home. Thank you.
The question is that the grievances be noted, and I call the member for Jagga Jagga.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, in May, our government asked Australians to give them to give us the opportunity to deliver a better future for all of them, and they were clear when they voted our party in that they were looking to our government to fix a number of outstanding challenges that communities like mine are facing. And I am very clear that some of the biggest challenges that my community, and I think communities around the country, are facing is very much in our health system, when we look at the impact of Medicare having been underinvested in, having been undermined for almost a decade, and also in our aged care system, where for too long the care of older Australians just has not been what it should be. Older Australians should absolutely have dignity in their lives, and as I said, for too long, that has not been the experience of people in the aged care system. And I've certainly heard from so many people in my community about their concerns about what's happening in aged care. I've had people come to me and say that they weren't sure if they didn't go in every day whether their loved one would be fed. I've had people come to me and say how unsure they were whether their loved one in aged care was getting the appropriate medical care. The GP only came once a week, there wasn't a nurse there, it was unclear what sort of support was being offered. And of course, having a loved one in aged care is difficult enough without having these extra worries on your mind. So our government has absolutely made fixing aged care a priority of the work we are doing, because we know that all Australians should have confidence that in their old age they will be able to live with dignity. That is a fundamental right for them. So we're determined to reverse the neglect of the previous government, and we're committed to putting security, dignity, quality and humanity back into aged care. Aged care will remain a top priority for our government. I'm particularly proud to be part of a government that's committed to putting nurses back into the aged care system. As I said, it's a concern a number of constituents have brought to me, that they're just not sure what medical care is there. And then they've come in the morning and asked, well, why wasn't this addressed overnight? And the reality was there was just no one there to address it. So having qualified nurses in our aged care homes 24/7 is going to be a game changer. It's not easy. Of course, it will take us some time to get there, to make sure that this reform is put in place in a way that is sustainable, that is implementable, but I'm absolutely confident that we are doing the work we need to do to make sure that older Australians in aged care are getting that level, that standard of care that they should. The Implementing Care Reform Bill, which passed Parliament in October, as well as having that requirement to have a registered nurse on site from 1 July 2023, it means that those people will get that immediate clinical attention when they need it, and fewer unnecessary trips to hospital as well, which of course, again, hospitals in my area are very much overstretched at the moment. So the more we can provide this care in nursing homes, in aged care homes, before people need to go to hospital, the better that will be for all of us. Of course, the new aged care classification funding model started from the 1st of October this year, and this new model will provide more funding for residents in residential care, with an uplift of nearly 13% more funding than the previous model, as well as more equitable care funding to providers that better matches the needs of residents and the levels of care they receive. And so this means carers will have more time to care for older Australians, an average of 35 additional minutes per day compared to current levels. Again, one of the things I hear constantly in my community is that people are very much concerned that the care, while they respect the aged care workers who are working so hard to provide care to their loved ones, they just don't have the time. So this will help with that problem. And of course, we are also working to get aged care workers the pay rise that they so richly deserve and need. Deputy Speaker, outside of aged care, our government is also aware of cost of living pressures facing older Australians. Earlier this month, we increased the thresholds for the Commonwealth Seniors Health Card, and this is one way we are supporting older Australians. The annual income thresholds will increase to $90,000 for singles, up from the current limit of $50,761, and $144,000 for couples, up from the current limit of $92,416. And this delivers on an election commitment we took to older Australians, ensuring that more people, and I know people in my community are very pleased about this, will qualify for the Commonwealth Seniors Health Card. And that will make a real difference. Alongside this, I'm very proud that our government is making medicines cheaper from the start of 2023. And people in my community will absolutely benefit from that at this time when, again, we know cost of living pressures are a real thing. To have that safety net in place, to know that your medicines will be cheaper, will be a big thing for people in my community, particularly, again, for older people in my community who I know have been struggling with the cost of medicines. Deputy Speaker, one of the biggest issues that my constituents are bringing to me at the moment is an issue around GPs in the community. And certainly in the past few months, I have had a number of people come to me and say, the last bulk billing doctor in the area just shut down. There's nowhere we can go anymore to get bulk billing services. And this is a real concern, obviously. Our system is built on Medicare being there for people when they need it, on access to a GP being affordable. And it's a system our government inherited because the previous government neglected Medicare. They failed to do the work they should have done to make sure that this absolute plank of our health system, the bit that's holding it all together, was as strong as it should be. And so we're now in this situation where in communities like mine, people are starting to wonder, will I be able to get in to see a GP? If I do get in to see the GP, will I be able to afford to see the GP? This is not the health system that our country wants or deserves. And so I am very pleased that the Health Minister recognises the seriousness of this situation, that our government is doing everything we can to start working on this problem that we've inherited from a decade of neglect, from a decade of a government that just didn't value Medicare and hasn't done the work to make sure our GPs were set up in our communities. So we've started on the important work with the appointment of our Strengthening Medicare Task Force, which is a group of experts and other representatives who will be looking at these issues around improving patient access to GPs, access to nursing and allied health services, affordability issues, and the management of complex cases. So this is really critical to our health system locally and across the country. We're investing $750 million to implement the highest priority reforms that are recommended by the task force. So we really do want people to see improvements in our health system as soon as those recommendations can be made and can be implemented. And of course, in my local community, I am very pleased that we have a commitment to have a Medicare urgent care clinic established. I know our local hospital, the Austin Hospital, does wonderful work, but they, like hospitals around this country, are overstretched. When I talk to them, when I talk to the nurses who work there, they just keep raising with me, our ED is just absolutely always at a level of busyness we've never seen before. And they know that if we are able to take some of the pressure off those EDs, if we are able to get our GP system functioning so that that can do the work, so that people know that they can go to a GP, and including this Medicare clinic that we will establish for some of those issues that they're currently going to the emergency department for, that will absolutely make a difference to those people. So, Deputy Speaker, I really want to highlight how critical this issue of fixing our health system is to my community and to communities around the country. I know that GPs are such an important part of our health system, and our government knows this, and that is why our government is investing in Medicare. We are doing everything we can to work out what's gone wrong over the past decade, to look at the impacts of the previous government freezing the Medicare rebate for 6 years, ripping billions from healthcare and, of course, seeing gap fees skyrocket. That is not the country we should live in. Healthcare in this country must be affordable, it must be accessible for all, and making sure we have a strong Medicare system and strong local GPs is a big part of that.
There being no further grievances, the debate is adjourned, and the resumption of the debate will be made an order of the day for the next sitting. The member for Spence.
I move that the Federation Chamber do now adjourn.
The member for Flinders.
I second the motion.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. All of those opinions say aye. All those against? Carried. The Federation Chamber stands adjourned until 9:30 a.m. tomorrow.